Chapter 999. In the Paiji Palace, the bell had rung 6 times, the appointed time for the various sects had passed. Ingye saw that no one from the Shaoqing Pai had come. He understood that according to the Shaoqing Pai's usual conduct, this time they had no intention to interfere in this matter. Thus, he bowed to the seat, then turned to the door of the hall and said, "The time has come. Disciples, seal the palace." As soon as he gave the order, there was a loud bang from outside. 16 golden doors were lowered at the same time, sealing the palace door. Then, the entire palace shook and escaped into the void. A moment later, it disappeared without a trace. This temple could be flown anywhere outside the heavens without leaving a trace. After that, if anyone came again, they would not be able to enter without the permission of the people in the hall. After flying for a while, there was still silence in the hall. Grand Master Yuling was not in the mood to waste time here. Seeing that no one spoke, he took the lead and said, "Jinrenli, just now, you haven't finished speaking. Now that the Jinren of the various sects have arrived, is it convenient?" Jinrenli bowed slightly, stood up, and said slowly, "Everyone, when we learned that the extraterrestrial demon had appeared, our sect felt that this matter was of great importance. We immediately sent people to investigate in detail. Now it is clear that the person who proved to be the extraterrestrial demon was originally the abandoned disciple of our sect, Sima Quan." Jinren Wu raised his eyebrows and said, "Abandoned disciple?" Jinrenli said, "After finding out that he had indeed joined the devil, our sect has already expelled him from the sect." Jinren Wu's eyes were cold and stern. He said in a stern voice, "Do you really think that you can get rid of this F-long F-wind F-text F-study, C+T thing?" Sima Quan was originally a disciple of the Netherworld Spring sect. The appearance of the extraterrestrial demon is the Netherworld Spring sect's fault. Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, "Jinren Wu, the Jinren of the various sects are here. Today, we are going to discuss who is right and who is wrong. Why don't you listen to what Jinrenli has to say first?" Hearing him say this, Jinren Wu looked to the side. Seeing that many of the Jinren of the Xianmen were not looking at them and no one was willing to support him, he could only keep quiet. Jinrenli bowed to Zhang Yan and said, "More than 10,000 years ago, the seniors of my Lingmen entered the devil's cave to suppress the devil and fought with all their might. The tragedy cannot be described with words. The number of casualties was no less than that of the battle to exterminate the sky demon. If it wasn't for our soulless sex efforts, Donghua wouldn't be as prosperous as it is today." As soon as he said that, the perfected masters of the 5 sects of the demon sect nodded their heads, while the perfected masters of the celestial sect were expressionless. Jinrenli paused for a moment before continuing, "The celestial demon is known as the Yin God. The cultivators of our 6 sects all know that once this devil appears in the world, it will bring about endless harm. That's why ever since our sects established our sect, whenever we see a 1,000-year-old devil, we do our best to exterminate it. This action is not only to save people, but also to save us. I don't dare to be careless." At this time, Taoist Master Wu said with a hint of mockery, "That's strange. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be any survivors, so where did this demon come from?" Jinrenli said, "After investigation, this matter was done by a few rogue cultivators. The person who returned from the Nanhua sect was Huang Yugong." When he heard this, he couldn't help but question, just a few rogue cultivators, how could they capture such a devil? Jinrenli said, "They don't have this ability, but hundreds of years ago, the spiritual vigor in the cave gradually increased. These people can be considered somewhat lucky to occupy a small spiritual cave. Later on, they honored our sect as a superior sect, and it wasn't easy for them to do so. We were also afraid that there would be no one to suppress the devil in the spiritual cave, so we allowed them to cultivate there. We were also afraid that there would be no one to suppress the devil in the spirit cave, so we allowed him to cultivate there. However, we didn't expect that he would somehow find a manor left behind by someone and obtain many benefits. There are 3 copper cauldrons here, and I don't know who was so daring as to seal a few true devils in them. At that time, he reported it to our sect, and the person who received the report was Sima Quan. This child cultivated the technique of Xiangzhen, so greed arose in his heart, and he did not report it. Taoist Master Wu said, "Where are they now?" Jinrenli said, "They have been captured by our sect and are being held in the sect. If you have any doubts, you can ask them." Taoist Master Wu sneered, he didn't believe this at all. Since the Netherworld Spring sect dared to let them investigate, they must have done it flawlessly, so there wouldn't be any results no matter what. It would be the same no matter how they investigated. However, it wasn't that easy to shirk the responsibility. He raised his finger and a ray of spiritual light shot down. When it landed on the palace, 3 bronze cauldrons appeared. He said, "The cauldron of suppressing demon you mentioned, is this it?" Jinrenli took a look and said, "I haven't seen it before, but since Jinren Wu took it out, it can't be fake." Jinren Wu sneered and said, "I've checked it out. This cauldron is made of extraterrestrial star sand, dizzy D, and other things. One of these 2 things is outside the 9th heaven, and the other is in the deep water of the underground, so it's not something that ordinary people can get their hands on. Moreover, the refining method is definitely not something that a cultivator in the phantasm realm can do." He looked at the shrines of the devil's sect and said with a slight sarcasm, "If a true devil is sealed, as far as I know, it will definitely disappear within 1,000 years. However, no one in your spiritual gate has become a cave." Jinrenli said that those people obtained the abode of a predecessor, but I wonder which expert in your spiritual gate this predecessor is? Jinrenli's expression froze and he said, "Is there such a thing?" He pondered for a moment and took a qi dynamic over to identify it. Then, he turned his gaze and looked at Taoist Lu of Jiling sect, saying, "Taoist brother Lu is an expert in this, why don't you take a look?" Jinren Lu also took a qi dynamic and came forward. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "There is indeed a true devil imprisoned in this cauldron. This copper cauldron was also made by us, but from the looks of it, it seems to be the work of a fellow from the Blood Soul sect." Hearing this, Jinren Zhu immediately looked at the shrine of the Blood Soul sect. Jinren Wu was also a little surprised. He originally thought that this was the work of the Netherworld Spring sect, but he didn't expect that it would be the work of the Blood Soul sect. However, this was ultimately a battle for the Devil's Cave, and suppressing the devils was the consensus of the mystic demons. As long as it was proven that the Devil's sect had done such a taboo, they could use righteousness to force them to concede. It didn't matter which sect did it. The person from the Blood Soul sect was Wen Qingxiang. Facing the unfriendly gazes of the crowd, he smiled calmly and said, "This is strange. Let me take a look." A divine light appeared in his eyes, and he looked at the cauldron for a while before stopping. He couldn't help but sigh and said, "I already know where it came from. It is indeed related to my sect, but this time, Jinren Wu, you can't blame us." Jinren Wu said coldly, "I want to hear the reason." When Qingxiang pointed with his finger, and the cauldron flipped over, revealing the bottom of the cauldron. There were several blurry forbidden patterns on it. The few Zenrens from the Xianmen sect saw it, but they didn't think much of it. But when the people from the Devil's sect saw it, everyone's expression changed. When Qingxiang cast another spiritual light on it, and a spiritual seal appeared on it. It leaped into the air, and there were 2 words, Ru Huang, on it. The words were written fiercely, and there was a faint glow of blood. Suddenly, a fierce and cruel aura rushed towards them. Huang Yugong from the Nanhua sect was shocked. He stood up and said, "Is this left behind by the devil Ru Huang?" When Qingxiang nodded and said, "It is not bad. Everything that Ru Huang has passed through has this spiritual seal, and outsiders can't use it. It must be those loose cultivators who got it by accident, and didn't know where it came from, so they dared to use it." Jinren Lu said in a low voice, "Or maybe it was Ru Huang's doing. Even Sima Quan fell into his trap, and that's why he joined the devil." Jinren Wei of the Yuanming sect said, "It is possible. Fellow Daoist from the Netherworld Spring sect must have met with an unexpected disaster." Jinren Pang from the Huanjin sect suddenly stood up, and his face was gloomy. He said, "Since this has something to do with Ru Huang, we should get rid of him as soon as possible." Jinren Yuling said in a low voice, to prevent the disaster from happening again, we should do this. Xinren Wu frowned. This cauldron was given to him by Lady Zhou when he came out. Initially, he was a little hesitant. He thought that if this was the doing of the Netherworld Spring sect, it was unlikely that there would be such a big loophole. However, after investigating, it was indeed the doing of the Dongtian. He thought that it was not a big deal, but it should not be a big deal. He didn't expect that it would be related to Ru Huang, which was unexpected. Xinren Wu looked at him and thought to himself, I owe you, Yu Xiao, a favor for opening up the Egret continent. Let me help you this time. He opened his mouth and said, don't blame me for being rude. This is an important matter, but I have to ask one more thing. Is it possible that someone had obtained this item long ago and hid it in secret, only taking it out during the fight for the demon cave? When Qingxiang laughed, Xinren Wu must be joking. Back then, Ru Huang's divine arts were mostly used to restrain us. Back then, there was a fellow Taoist from the Netherworld Spring sect who was careless and fell into a trap. Until now, he is still in closed-door training and has not come out. What's more, a few true demons are useless to us, so why would they keep them around to harm their own disciples? From my point of view, this is indeed a coincidence. He looked at Xinren Li and said, however, Sima Quan used to be a disciple of the Netherworld Spring sect. Xinren Li, this is due to your sect's lack of discipline. Xinren Li bowed to the crowd and said, our sect's lack of discipline has alarmed our fellow Taoists. It is our sect's fault. After this, we are willing to offer some Dan Jades as an apology. When the Xinren heard this, they all nodded their heads. Xinren Wu snorted, knowing that he had let them pass this hurdle. In fact, if this matter were to be investigated further, they would eventually be able to find something wrong. However, since entering the hall, it was mostly him arguing with the other party. After all, he was from the heavenly abode, and he also wanted to save face. Since he had made a mistake, he could not continue to cling on, or else he would become a laughing stock. He thought to himself, my Yuxiao school is in charge of the Donghua South Continent. Usually, we do not have much contact with our fellow Taoists. We do not want to get involved in any trouble, but today, we have no one to support us. When I return, I will definitely report to the Venerable Master and try to change this situation. Grandmaster Yuling nodded and said, since the Netherworld Spring sect has admitted to their mistake, I think we do not need to pursue it too much. She looked at Zhang Yan and said, what does Xinren Zhang think? All the Zenrens turned to look at him. Zhang Yan smiled and said, we can let bygones be bygones, but the extraterrestrial demon still exists. What do you think, Xinren Li? Xinren Li secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He threw out the Dan Jades to let the Zenrens pretend to be confused. However, if the Qinsang school did not agree and joined forces with the Yuxiao Qinsang to not let it go, even if the Zenrens did not say anything, this matter would not be resolved. So he said, my sect believes that the extraterrestrial demon must be eliminated. Since it was the abandoned disciple Sima Quan who caused trouble, my sect will naturally do its best to exterminate him and bear the responsibility. However, in a battle of sorcery, we must first suppress the spirit cave, otherwise it will be difficult to eliminate it. However, in this battle of the spirit cave, the outcome of our two sects has not been decided. How should we discuss this? Chapter 1000. P.S. I was so engrossed in writing that I didn't pay attention to saving it. I skipped it at the end. I can only rely on my impression to rewrite it. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind The Struggle for the Great Path, and listen to more of your suggestions for the novel. Follow the official account and tell me in secret. Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, in my opinion, there is no need to determine victory or defeat this time. If fellow cultivator of the Netherworld Spring sect has the means to kill the heavenly demon and leave the spirit cave, then you can deal with it yourself. However, half of the pills obtained here must be given to the Xian men. Patriarch Yuling immediately agreed, Xinren Zhang's words are very good. I think it is feasible. When the Xinren of the Xian men heard this, they looked at each other and nodded. Not only did they want the Devil's sect to help eliminate the demons, but they also wanted them to admit defeat this time. The other party would never agree. The consensus of the Xian men was to suppress the devil's sect so that it could not grow. However, after this incident, they also realized that if they forced it too much, it was hard to guarantee that it would not do anything. It was time to loosen the reins. Even if the devil's sect had one more spirit cave, its power would not be comparable to that of the Xian men. It was impossible for them to catch up in a few hundred years. If they acted according to Zhang Yan's plan, not only would they achieve the goal of suppression, but everyone would also benefit. It was a win-win strategy. Most of the people present were happy, but Jinren Wu's expression was not very good. Under normal circumstances, it would not be difficult for Yuxiao School to win the battle for the Devil's Cave because of their safe preparations. However, this good situation was ruined because of the appearance of the heavenly demon. Therefore, he thought that the true demon land was released by the Devil sect. It was fine if they did not care about the outcome now. After all, they had lost in the scheme. It was also the Zhou family's failure to plan. But what he couldn't tolerate was that the spirit cave was near the Jade Sky sect. If the Devil sect were to occupy it, then it would be equivalent to burying a thorn in the sect's door. If he were to agree to it, then he would definitely become a sinner in the sect. He could not help but think quickly. Thinking of countermeasures, Jinren Li thought for a moment. Although it would be troublesome to only get rid of the heavenly demon and not touch the spirit cave, the Netherworld Spring sect had been a big sect for tens of thousands of years. It had its own way of suppressing it. Moreover, this matter had already been dealt with, so it would not be difficult to do. It was just that he was a little reluctant to split half of the Pill Jade and the Mystic Gate. However, he also knew that this should be the best result he could obtain. He cupped his hands and said, "My sect," before he could finish his words, Immortal Wu suddenly interrupted, "Wait." Everyone turned to look. Jinren Wu stood up slowly and said in a tough tone, "The Yuxiao School is a righteous sect, how can we allow any filth to be left in front of our door? No matter what everyone thinks, I, Yuxiao, must suppress that devil cave." Then he turned to Jinren Li and said, "Jinren Li. This time, I will have to ask you to suffer some grievances. How about we, the Celestial Sect of Wonders, win?" Jinren Li was not annoyed. He only said quietly, "Daoist Wu's words are unfair to me." Jinren Wu said in a deep voice, "The Xian men will not bully you. When the spirit cave appears, there is no need to fight anymore. We will let you have it. What do you think?" Jinren Li was stunned. Then he secretly pondered and said, "This Jinren Wu is really scheming." Jinren Wu's proposal seemed generous on the surface, but the Devil sect did not seem to have much of an advantage. If they had the Devil Cave, there might be future disciples who could use it to cultivate. If they could break through to the Elephant Realm and have one more Spirit Cave, they could support many Taoists of Paradise. However, if they waited for the next Devil Cave to appear, it would be at least 300 to 400 years later. By then, the final tribulation would be near. How much time would they have to manage it? Jinren Wu looked around. "Of course, what do you all think?" Seeing that no one responded, Jinren Wu suppressed his anger and said, "Yuxiao will not take the Origin Furnace Pill Jade from suppressing the Spirit Cave. I can share it with everyone." The Origin Furnace Pill Jade could only be obtained by suppressing the Spirit Cave. It was far better than the Pill Jade that was formed over a long period of time. Since he was willing to share it, everyone was tempted. Jinren Wu immediately said, "I agree with this proposal. The devil's mana is not weak. It will be safer to have fellow Taoists of Yuxiao School to suppress it. If it was an ordinary skyscraper, it would only have the power of transformation and not the power to destroy the world. However, this devil was stolen by Sima Quan using the method of phase reversal. Its mana was also tyrannical. If it was forced into a corner, there was no guarantee that it would not destroy indiscriminately. However, Yuxiao School had Yuya in their hands. As long as they stayed in front of the door, it would not be difficult to control it." Patriarch Yuling said, "Jinren Zhang, what do you think?" Zhang Yan smiled indifferently and said, "Since everyone thinks that this plan is feasible, I have no other opinion." Patriarch Yuling turned his head and said, Jinrenli, what do you think? Jinrenli thought it was a pity, but Yu Xiaofang's attitude was tough, and he would not make any concessions. This was also expected. He pondered for a while and said, this is not a small matter. I can't make the decision. Let me discuss it with my fellow Taoists. Patriarch Yuling said, of course. Ing Yazi waved his horsetail whisk, and a stone gate fell between the two halls, separating Xian Mo and Mo. It was rare for all the Taoists of Xian men to gather in one place. Seeing that there was nothing to do, they each looked for their old friends to talk. Zhang Yan noticed that Jinren Yuling had expressed his goodwill many times just now, so he thought that he should respond. He cupped his hands and said, thank you for your help in the matter of Fengling Ocean. The Jade Tomb Patriarch smiled and said, Palace Master Zhang is too polite. Fellow Daoist's disciple Wei Zihong is decisive in handling matters and is extremely courageous. My sect has not been able to help much, but when I visited him the last time, my disciple kept praising him and mentioned him to me. It was not difficult for Zhang Yan to understand the meaning of his words. He smiled and said, I have already ordered him to go to Fengling Ocean, but he is alone and weak. He needs help from fellow Taoists. Patriarch Yuling immediately said, originally, fellow Taoists of Xian men should help each other. When I go back, I can send a few disciples to help. Zhang Yan glanced at her and nodded. Not long after the two of them spoke, the stone gate was lifted, revealing the scene of the hall opposite. Jinrenli stood at the front, and the other 5 devil sect Jinren stood behind him. When the Jinren saw this, they immediately frowned. Patriarch Yuling said in a deep voice, Jinrenli, what do you think? Jinrenli cupped his hands and said, we have discussed and are willing to act according to this plan. As soon as this was said, the solemn atmosphere in the hall immediately eased. The Jade Tomb founding master was pleased to hear this. Your side understands the principle of righteousness. Since this is the case, the disciples of our 2 families will be greatly respected. Our disciples can also enjoy hundreds of years of peace. However, this was just a casual remark. All the Jinren present knew that as long as the 3 major tribulations were not over, the battle between the two would not stop. Moreover, with hundreds of years of recuperation and accumulation, they would fight again next time. It would probably be even more tragic. Jinrenli said, since it is over, we should also take our leave. Patriarch Yuling said, everyone, take care. Daoren Ingya hurriedly said, disciples, quickly open the palace's restrictions. With a chime, the PG palace stopped moving and stopped moving. The 16 stone gates opened with a loud bang. Not long after, rays of spiritual light flew out in all directions of the Donghua continent. Zhang Yan said goodbye to Zhu Zhen in the heavenly palace and flew back. When he arrived at the Duzhen Hall, he merged with his real body and went to the upper hall. He entered the hall to see sect leader Qin and told him in detail what had happened. He then said, this time, Yu Xiao didn't get any benefits at all. Instead, he had to give away the elixir jade. Based on his past conduct, he won't suffer this loss for nothing. Sect leader Qin said, in this world, there are 2 things. One is reason, and the other is power. If the powerful person is unreasonable, the weak person may stand on the side of reason. But there is nothing they can do. Zhang Yan smiled and said, justice is in the hearts of people. If you are unreasonable, you will naturally lose the hearts of people. Sect leader Qin nodded and said, let's see how he does. Yuxiao School, Shaohua Daliang Grotto Heaven. A ray of spiritual light landed and Jinren Wu woke up from his meditation. He sat on the spot for a while and then wrote a letter. He called a disciple over and ordered him to send it to Mo Chiu Cliff. Suddenly, there was a sound from the stone ring in front of the hall and a light shadow appeared. When he saw it, he hurriedly stood up and greeted, Senior Marshal Brother Yun Qing. There were 3 Grotto Heaven Jinren in the Wu clan. His Daoist name was Yun Bai and he was of the same generation as Daoist Yun Qing. Jinren Yun Qing said, since Junior Marshal Brother Yun Bai's incarnation is back, what is the result? Jinren Wu sighed and told him about the decision of the sections. In the end, he said, for the demonic cave, I had to do this. Jinren Yunqing thought about it. This time, everyone benefited except for Yu Xiao. He was depressed but he couldn't blame this junior martial brother. After all, he had tried his best. Thus, he said, this isn't junior martial brother's fault. It's the Zhou family who didn't plan well and caused such trouble. Master should understand the reason behind it. At this moment, a boy holding a cup came over and said, Is Jinren Yunbai here? Master's decree is here. Jinren Wu heard it and waved his sleeve to open the formation. He stepped on a ray of light and said, What decree does Master have? The boy tossed the cup in his hand up and said, Jinren, please catch it. Jinren Wu looked at it and the item was in front of him. He looked at it carefully and his expression changed. After a while, he kept it and said, Please tell Jinren that I will act according to the plan. The boy bowed to him and left. Jinren Wu stood on the spot for a while and waved his sleeve. A ray of light flew out of the mountain gate and towards the direction of the spiritual cave. He took out a Taoist talisman, looked at it twice, and threw it down with a shake of his hand. The jade talisman was shining brightly like a feather. It floated down slowly and disappeared into the depths of the cave. At this moment, in the demonic cave, Sima Quan was absorbing spiritual vigor with all his might. Even though he showed goodwill to the sect, he didn't put all his hopes on it. He understood that he could only rely on his own mana. Although the surroundings were unusually calm, he did not feel at ease. Instead, he felt an inexplicable sense of danger. Hence, he disregarded everything else and cultivated with all his might. With the abundant spiritual opportunity, his power grew with each passing day. Right at this moment, he suddenly felt a burning sensation. Startled, he looked up and saw a jade talisman floating down. He immediately felt that something was wrong. He wanted to stop it, but there was an indescribable fear in his heart. He didn't dare to make a move and just stared at it. The jade talisman ignored him and slowly floated down to the bottom of the spiritual cave. After an unknown period of time, a spark first lit up before his eyes, and then a bang sounded out as boundless starfire sprayed out like a prairie fire, instantly filling up all the ravines underground. The vast and mighty force caused him to feel fear at the sight of it, and he actually didn't have the slightest strength to resist. Under his great shock, he turned into a gust of cold wind and fled all the way out. When he arrived outside the spirit cave, he didn't dare stay for even a moment, and he turned around before transforming into nothingness and fleeing in panic. Jinren Wu saw what happened but he didn't chase after him. At this moment, 2 rays of starlight rose from the mountain gate of Yu Xiao and landed in front of him. They turned into 2 Taoists. He said, Master has driven away the sky demon. Since the 2 junior brothers are here, let's attack together and destroy this demonic cave. Chapter 1001. P.S. Read the exclusive story behind Fight for the Great Path, and listen to more of your suggestions for the novel. Follow Qidian's official account and tell me secretly. Although all the cultivators had returned to their sects, they were still paying attention to the movements in front of Yu Xiao School. Seeing that the sky demon had been chased out of the demon's cave, they thought that their plan was set. Who knew that Yu Xiao School would ignore them and let them escape? Zhang Yan also saw this scene from the Dujin Hall. Seeing that the sky demon had escaped, he understood Yu Xiao's intention. If the sky demon wanted to survive, it had to first find a demon's cave. Then, it would most likely come back to find trouble with the devil's doctrine. Although he could not afford to offend the grotto heavens of the 6 devils' doctrine, his disciples could not resist. Moreover, Sima Quan was a cultivator of the Netherworld Spring sect and was very familiar with the situation of the devil's doctrine. It would not be difficult for him to find a few small demons' caves. This was Yu Xiao School's revenge on the devil's doctrine for ruining his plan. Zhang Yan secretly snorted. As the saying goes, the initiator will not have a successor. In this world, as long as one person broke the rules, there would be a second and a third person. The devil's doctrine was reaping what it had sown. However, the heavenly devil also had the ability to destroy the continent. Although he might not do so, and the Jade Sky sect might have already made preparations to deal with it, this matter couldn't be entrusted to others. He had to make preparations himself. As soon as he thought of that, he shook his sleeve and took out the Duzhen Hall Master's golden seal. In the Xuanzi world, a torrential current surged out, the tide rose and fell, in a split second above the Dragon Abyss Great Lake, it formed a Milky Way. Anjin Temple, Baoyang Grotto Heaven. Jinren Pang looked at the sky in silence. She could not ignore the sky demon's appearance. However, as a grotto heaven, she still had to think of the Outer Mountains plan. If she went out rashly, she might not succeed, but it could easily damage her cultivation. If she caused the Outer Mountain to not be able to survive the 3 trials, it would be her fault. Inadvertently, there was a flash of spiritual light outside the hall. A boy hopped over and said loudly, "Pang Yunxiang, could it be that you want to exorcise demons? You don't feel happy at all when you're in someone else's territory, but I'm not going with you." Master Pang said in a deep voice, "Please be at ease, Master Zhizheng. Although the matter of eliminating demons is important, the sect is even more important." "I know what's important." The boy clapped his hands and said, "That's good, the demon has come into being. What I'm most worried about is that group of Devil's Sect cultivators. Don't go and join in the fun. Of course, if they invite you, don't forget to bring me along." Reverend Pang spat. Yu Xiao only cares about his own happiness, but he doesn't care about his fellow Taoists. This kind of sect definitely can't be relied on. On the other hand, Shaoqing was a maverick, and only the Yu Xiao and Qinsang sects could talk to them. "My small sect isn't in their eyes, but the Qinsang school is different. I heard that they accepted quite a few small sects in these past few years, and they also take good care of them. There were hundreds and thousands of Xianmen sects in the north, but after the Devil's calamity, many of them were massacred. As long as they were under the protection of the Qinsang school, even if their sects were destroyed, the Qinsang school would help them rebuild their sections. Therefore, for the past few hundred years, the small sects that really had their orthodoxy severed. In reality, there weren't many of them." Reverend Pang thought about the recent incident where the Qinsang school sent an envoy to ask for precious materials and the devil-subduing mantra, and felt that this was an opportunity. He changed his mind and instructed the maidservant beside him, "Call Zhang Zhen over." The maidservant bowed and left to carry out the order. After a while, Zhang Zhen came to the front of the steps and curtsied, saying, "Disciple pays respect to master." Reverend Pang said, "Are you going to Qinsang school?" Zhang Zhen replied, "Yes, I'm going to visit the Qinsang school's hall Master Du Zhen. I've already made an appointment with Reverend Wang, and I'll leave in 3 days." Reverend Pang sighed, "Let's wait for a few days." Zhang Zhen couldn't help but be surprised. Her beautiful eyes turned and she asked, "Did something happen outside?" Reverend Pang said, "The heavenly demon was chased out of the spirit cave by the Yuxiao school, and we don't know where it is hiding now. Demons have always been the enemy of Huanjin Temple, and this kind of demon isn't something you can handle. To prevent any accidents, it's better for you to cultivate peacefully in the sect. I'll go to Qinsang school to explain the reason." The boy was very dissatisfied after hearing this, and he shouted, "Pang Yunxiang, it's just a heavenly demon, what's there to worry about? I don't know what you're afraid of, but isn't she going to Qinsang school? I'll escort her there, and I'll make sure she'll be fine." Reverend Pang grunted and said, Why aren't you thanking Reverend Jinren?" Zhang Zhen bowed and said, "Thank you, Reverend Jinren. Reverend Jinren is a person of virtue and prestige, and you're very knowledgeable. You're not as young and inexperienced as your disciple. If I'm being impolite on this trip to Qinsang, please correct me at any time." The boy was beaming with joy, and he danced and said, All right, it's settled then." Reverend Pang carefully reminded Zhang Zhen a few more times, and only after he told her to be careful, did he let her go. Looking at Zhang Zhen's back, she thought, "My disciple's appearance is really similar to Reverend Zhang, and their ages aren't that different. They might have some sort of relationship." Originally, when she saw Zhang Yan at PG Palace, she already had some doubts. However, Zhang Yan's identity was different, and his cultivation and seniority were also extremely high. If she rashly asked about it, she would be suspected of taking advantage of him. Therefore, she suppressed her doubts and did not say it out loud. If Zhang Yan was really related to her disciple, it would be more convenient for the two sects to interact in the future. In the southeast, in front of the Devil's Cave, 2 golden and 1 white Dharma forms that looked like stars and fire soared into the sky and merged into one. Rays of light flashed across the sky, and as if an axe was chiseling and chopping, it carved out cracks in the high cloud. Then, with a sudden turn, there was an infinite amount of dazzling light that spread across the sky, and the clouds and the rosy clouds were enveloped in a dazzling light. After a short while, there was a rumbling sound, and the spiritual vigor in the Devil's Cave seemed to have rolled out. Turbid qi gushed out and spread for hundreds of miles in the sky. After a full 10 to 12 hours, the sound gradually calmed down, and the 3 rays of spiritual light also disappeared. Reverend Wu looked at the core jade in his hand and felt that it was a pity. Such a good item, but he couldn't get his hands on it, and had to give it to someone else. He rolled up his sleeves and was about to return to the sect. Just at that moment, he saw a small sword light coming from the west. In the blink of an eye, it was in front of him. A short old man with white eyebrows and beard appeared. He stared at Reverend Wu and said, "Wu Yunbi, why did your Yuxiao school release the heavenly demon?" Reverend Wu bowed and said, "So it's Reverend Shuev Shaoqing. I didn't release it, I just forced it out of the Devil's Cave so that it would be easier to deal with it." Elder Shui sneered and said, "Don't try to lie to me, I'm only here on Yingzhen Ren's order to ask. Does your Yuxiao school not care about the heavenly demon?" Reverend Wu said in a deep voice, "The people who are worried now are the 6 demon sects. The fellow Taoists of the Xianmen sect didn't come to ask about it. You, Shaoqing, didn't come back last time, and only watched from the sidelines. Why are you in such a hurry to stand out now?" Elder Shui chuckled and said, "But I understand. However, if the Shaoqing sect wants to do something, no one can stop us. If we don't want to do it, no one can persuade us." When he finished, he suddenly disappeared from where he was. In the next moment, a rainbow flashed in the sky. When he looked again, he had completely disappeared. After Sima Quan was forced to escape from the Devil's Cave, he was afraid that he would be targeted by the Xianmen Dongtian. He didn't dare to show himself, so he turned into a formless body and flew in the sky. Although he had formless techniques, he knew that there was no lack of things in the world that could find him. As such, he needed to find a place to hide. Originally, the place where Fu Mian and the others were at was a suitable place. However, the sect would most likely be on guard, so he couldn't go there. He had another thought. Thinking about how the Xiandang hut of the Netherworld Spring sect was nearby, he summoned a gust of Yin wind and burrowed underground. The ravines and underground rivers couldn't obstruct his formless body at all. After flying for tens of miles, he arrived at a spacious cave hall. The stone forest hung upside down above, densely packed together. There was a lake below, quiet and quiet. In the middle of the lake, there was a bowl-shaped hill. Around it, there were 10,000 stone tablets surrounding it, giving off the aura of an earth dragon. A hut that was 1,000 feet wide hung in the sky. Below it, there were thick dark clouds that didn't dissipate. Those restrictions didn't have any effect on him, so he easily passed through them and headed straight into the depths of the hut. It didn't take long before they arrived at an exquisitely decorated pavilion. A scholar was holding a jade slip in his hand, and he was spitting out wisps of pale white light. Above him, there were dozens of devils circling back and forth. They were staring at the white light with greed in their eyes, as if they wanted to come down and take a bite at any moment. Every time they couldn't resist, the scholar would spit out a mouthful of fresh blood. After they were full, he would chase them away. Sima Quan took a look and said slowly, "No matter how high you cultivate this technique, you won't be able to increase your cultivation by much. Even if you cultivate for hundreds of years, you can only reach the 2nd stage at most. As for the Dharmakaya stage, it's impossible." The scholar was shocked and hurriedly took out his magical weapon to protect his body. He shouted, "Who's here?" Sima Quan revealed himself and slowly walked out. When the scholars saw him, he couldn't help but be shocked. Then, he reacted and hurriedly put away the magical weapon in his hand. He cupped his hands and said, "So it's Elder Sima of the upper sect. Please forgive me for not welcoming you earlier." Sima Quan walked to the side of the praying mat and sat down cross-legged. The scholar was about to call for someone to serve him tea, but he was stopped by Sima Quan. He said, "There's no need to call for others. I have something for you to do." The scholar said, "Elder, please tell me what you need." Sima Quan waved his sleeve and a magical talisman flew out and landed between the two of them. He said, "Take this talisman and go to the Netherworld Spring sect. Find a chance to go to the 100 Origins Stone. When a big turtle comes out of the stream, throw this talisman down. You don't have to worry about the rest." The scholar was a little confused. He didn't know why Sima Quan didn't do it himself, but wanted him to. He couldn't help but feel nervous, afraid that he would be involved in the fight between the elders of the Netherworld Spring sect. However, he was only a lower sect elder, so he didn't dare to refuse. He could only go forward and accept the talisman. He said, "I will definitely deliver it." Sima Quan extended a finger and pointed. A black light flew out and entered between the scholar's eyebrows. "I will give you a technique, but it's only the first half. If you do your job well, then I can give you the second half. This is an urgent matter. There's no need for you to call for me here. Go quickly." The scholar examined it with his mind and found that this technique was extremely profound. It wasn't something his own sect could compare to. It seemed to be passed down from the Ling sect. He was instantly overjoyed. He bowed and said, "I will leave now." He clasped his hands together once more and retreated. Sima Quan thought, "I don't know if this letter will reach Master Uncle's hands." He wasn't a demon like the heavenly demon who acted according to his instincts. He deeply understood that with his own strength, he definitely couldn't fight against all the cultivators in the world. However, if he could make peace with the Netherworld Spring sect, he might have a chance of survival. If that didn't work, he could just hide overseas or in another continent for a while. No one would find him. Chapter 1002. Although Sima Quan wanted to escape from the Donghua continent, it was only a contingency plan. Unless he had no other choice, he was not willing to take this step. For the body of the sky demon to grow, one had to absorb turbid spiritual opportunity, and the other had to prey on the souls of its own kind or cultivators. As long as he did not cultivate the Genin demon, his cultivation would be like a boat sailing against the current. If he could not grow, he would regress. To him, the Devil's Cave was undoubtedly the safest place to cultivate. There were demons born there, and there was no lack of spiritual opportunity. Most importantly, even if the demon body was destroyed, as long as there was a trace of demonic consciousness in the Devil's Cave, after absorbing spiritual opportunity, he could quickly revive and rise again. However, other than the Donghua continent, the other 8 continents did not have such a place. As for hunting and killing cultivators, Sima Quan was not a demon who did whatever he wanted. He was still rational and knew that he could not fight against the Xian and demon families alone. Even someone as strong as Jinren Ru Huang was besieged to death in the end. Even his soul was thrown into the pool of 10,000 thunder refinements. He did not want to suffer the same fate, so he was not willing to do it for now. He did not ask for much. As long as the sect allowed him to stay in a small devil's cave, he could hide and not come out. If the sect encountered any inconveniences, they could help him. From his perspective, this was a win-win situation. It was not impossible for the sect to agree. However, if this path did not work, then he could only let go of all his worries and take the risk. Previously, when he escaped from the Devil's Cave, the talisman Starfire from Jade Heaven sect had almost wiped out all of his hidden clones. If he were to encounter a great enemy now, once this devil body was destroyed, he would completely perish. However, he only cared about escaping and did not have time to find a suitable furnace. Now that he was in the Xiandang hut, he could do it. Thus, With a shake of his body, he split off thousands of devil scents and sent them flying in all directions. In just a moment, 2,323 cultivators in the hut were silently infected by the demonic poison. In the future, as long as one person survived, the sky demon body would not die. However, in order to avoid being caught in one fell swoop like the previous time, he was prepared to send a few people out. After scanning the area with his spirit, he discovered that the 2 female disciples had decent aptitudes and vitality. He immediately ordered them to come over. The 2 female disciples were in the middle of cultivating when they suddenly heard a strange sound. After thinking about it carefully, it turned out that their teacher had ordered them to go and serve the upper sect elder. Although they were confused as to why they were asked to do such a thing, in the past when people from the upper sect came, they would always give them some benefits, so they were willing to do it. Thus, he hurried to the main hall, and when he reached the door, he said softly, "Is the sect elder here? The 2 of us have come under the orders of the pavilion master to listen to your orders." Sima Quan said in a deep voice, "Come in and talk." A burst of fragrance wafted into the hall, and 2 female disciples walked in. Not daring to raise their heads, they knelt on the ground and said in unison, "We will listen to upper sect elder's instructions." Sima Quan looked at the 2 of them, and a red light flashed in his eyes. Then, he pointed his finger, and 2 streams of black smoke flew down. He said, "Take this cultivation technique and cultivate it well. Many of my disciples died in the battle for the spirit cave. If you all cultivate diligently during this period of time, you will be able to cultivate the spirit cave to the best of your ability. If you too practice diligently, you can follow me and be an in-name disciple." When the 2 female cultivators heard this, they were instantly surprised and happy. Even though their aptitudes were not bad, they had only entered Tao not long ago. They originally thought that if they could gain the favor of this upper sect elder, it would be good enough to be bestowed with some talismans and pills. They never thought that they would have the chance to become his disciple. Even if it was only in name, it was still a step to the heavens. However, while they were happy, they couldn't help but worry, since the upper sect elder has given his orders, we dare not disobey. We will only turn to the sect, but how are we going to explain this to the honored master? Sima Quan said, "I will discuss this matter with sect leader Zhong, the 2 of you just need to focus on your cultivation." When the 2 women heard this, they no longer had any apprehensions. They suppressed the excitement in their hearts and kowtowed in gratitude. Sima Quan said, "To practice this technique, you need to find several kinds of spiritual herbs, but we don't have them in the Donghua continent. You need to go overseas to search for them. However, your cultivation is still shallow, so I will give you a treasure each for self-protection." When he finished, 2 objects flew down in the blink of an eye. The 2 women hurriedly caught them and saw that there were 2 round eggs in their hands. They picked them up and saw that as they rotated, they were crystal clear and bright, as if there was a child hugging its knees and sleeping inside. When they were about to take a closer look, the object suddenly shook and flew up. It flew around them, and they heard a weak voice, like a baby calling for its mother. There was even a faint sense of intimacy. The 2 women felt their hearts soften, and they hurriedly reached out and hugged it tightly in their arms. Sima Quan waved his hand and said, "Quickly go and cultivate. I don't accept useless people. After a year, I will send someone to check on your cultivation. If you don't make any progress, you don't need to see me again." The 2 women shivered and put away their joyful thoughts. They bowed and left the room. In Sima Quan's consciousness, after the 2 women returned to their residence, they packed up a little and left the sect, heading for the outer continent. He was very satisfied. With this, he finally had a way out. After waiting for about 10 days, Sect Master Zhong Ji returned to the sect. Without any delay, he got off the carriage and immediately rushed over to pay his respects to Sima Quan, saying, "Elder Sima, I have already sent out the talisman according to the talisman and was then led to see Elder Yu." Sima Quan revealed a look of concern and said, "Oh, what did Elder Yu say?" Although his master had already reincarnated, he had a good relationship with this Reverend Yu in the past. This person was also in the sect's cave and had a high position. This time, he secretly sent this sect leader Zhong to the sect to ask him to speak on his behalf. Zhong Ji reached into his sleeve and took out a letter. He said, "There is a letter here, please take a look." Sima Quan took it but didn't open it. Instead, he said, "Quickly go and open the sect's formation to guard against enemies." Zhong Ji didn't understand. When he went to the Netherworld Spring sect, he heard that the battle for the Spirit Cave had been decided. How could there be enemies at this time? However, he didn't dare to disobey the order and could only go and set it up. Sima Quan waited for him to leave before opening the letter. He felt a heat in his hand and the letter flew up several feet and stopped in midair. Then, it turned into a beam of light. It was a long-bearded Taoist who was sizing him up. When Sima Quan saw this person, he immediately stood up and bowed respectfully. He said, "Greetings, martial uncle Yu." The long-bearded Taoist said, "Martial nephew Sima, you really are like what you said in the letter. You still have your true nature and you didn't lie to me." Sima Quan said, "How would I dare to lie to martial uncle?" The long-bearded Taoist nodded. He said, "I see that the purpose of your letter is to find a small spirit cave to stay in." Sima Quan said, "Yes, I also know that if I return to the mountain, the sect will be in a difficult position. Therefore, I don't want a title. I just want a place to stay. Naturally, if the sect has any instructions, I will be willing to help." The long-bearded Taoist sighed. He said, "Although you are very sincere, if the sect does this, even if we can hide it from Xian men, we can't hide it from our fellow Taoists. This will attract criticism, so we can't allow you." Sima Quan's heart sank. After a moment of silence, he said, "I understand. Thank you, martial uncle, for telling me." The long-bearded Taoist shook his head. He said, "This is not a place to stay for long. You should leave quickly. That's all I have to say. If we meet again in the future, we will be enemies." When he finished, he turned to leave. At this moment, Sima Quan suddenly said, "Earlier, I gave the art of seizing the sky demon to the sect. I wonder if martial uncle has seen it." The long-bearded Taoist paused for a moment, but did not reply. He only gave him a deep look, and then his clone flickered and disappeared. Seeing that he had left, Sima Quan's expression suddenly became gloomy. He thought hatefully, "Since you won't let me live, then don't blame me for being merciless." Just as he was thinking about it, he suddenly felt a throbbing in his spirit. The demonic nature that had been dormant suddenly moved, as if it wanted to take over. He couldn't help but be shocked. He knew that this was the sky demon feeling that he had been thwarted time and time again. Therefore, he quickly suppressed it with all his strength. After a while, the demonic nature finally calmed down. However, he understood that this wasn't because of his own ability. It was because he hadn't reached the point where he had nowhere else to go. Therefore, he could still suppress it. However, it would be hard to say in the future. His heart couldn't help but be shrouded by a layer of haze. Could it be that he really had to hunt for spirits? With his current cultivation, he didn't care about ordinary cultivators. As for Taoist paradise, it would be very difficult for him to get his hands on them. There was only one way, and that was to split his demon body into tens of thousands. Every cultivator he saw would go up and seize them. This was also one of the reasons why the Xian and demon families didn't trust him. As long as the sky demon existed, it would be natural for them to be enemies with human cultivators. He might be able to restrain himself now, but who could say whether or not he would lose his nature in the future? If he turned into a genuine demon, then he would be even harder to deal with. Only by killing him before he grew stronger could everyone feel at ease. At this moment, he heard the sound of boundless waves coming from afar. With a rumble, the ceiling above the hut cracked and a stream of muddy water poured down. Under the impact, the entire hut shook as if it was about to fall. Fortunately, the mountain gate formation had been activated, so it didn't collapse in one fell swoop. Sima Quan snorted and immediately turned into a wisp of smoke. He raised his body and flew up with all his might. Not long after, he reached the surface. Raising his head, he saw a torrential river Styx. The mountains and plains were covered with water, and there were countless demons roaring and howling in anger. A thin and elegant Taoist stood in the sky, looking down with a cold gaze. Sima Qian looked around but didn't see anyone else. He sneered and said, "Jinrenli, are you the only one here?" Jinrenli didn't say anything. He just waved his sleeve, and with a loud bang, the torrential Styx river below rolled up. Sima Qian's face revealed a sinister smile. How could this be enough to hurt him? With a sway of his body, he immediately disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already right in front of him. His body grew and instantly became 1,000 feet tall. Opening his mouth, he swallowed the whole thing. Without anyone controlling the Styx river, it immediately turned into smoke and dissipated. All the demons also disappeared. However, Sima Qian felt that something was wrong. After all, Jinrenli was one of the heavenly caves in the sect. Although his cultivation might not be the highest, he wouldn't be so easily taken care of. Moreover, just now, Jinrenli had only swallowed a clone. When he thought of this, he suddenly came to a realization. Oh no, I've been tricked. P.S. There's one more time at night. Chapter 1003. Sima Qian slashed his shoulder with his finger and his arm fell off. Then, he flung the severed arm away as if he disliked it. After it floated 1,000 feet away, it suddenly turned into a gust of black chi. Then, it spun on the spot and transformed back into Jinrenli. Sima Qian glared at him hatefully. He had not been on guard just now, and this doppelganger actually had a talisman hidden in it. If he refined it, he would be able to cause harm to spiritual Master Li, but from then on, no matter where he went, he would be detected. It could be imagined that at that time, spiritual Master Li would not be the only one who would come to kill him. Fortunately, he noticed it early and decisively cut it off. Otherwise, no matter how much he changed, there would be no place for him to hide in this world. He was almost tricked once, so he was also afraid. He knew that it would be difficult to defeat his opponent, but he didn't want to be entangled here. So, he turned his body, turned into an invisible body, and disappeared in a flash. Not long after he fled, 2 clouds of turbid smoke rose from the sky and turned into 2 yellow clouds. 2 Taoists stood on them. One of them was Jinrenli, who was just now fighting with Sima Qian. He looked at the Taoist beside him and said, "Jinrenyu, just now, why don't you make a move? Do you still care about our past friendship?" Jinrenyu said calmly, "How can past friendship compare to the safety of the sect? It's just that Sima Qian has the body of a sky demon, so it's hard to kill him in one go. It's not good to force him too much, lest we destroy this continent. It's better to drive him away. If we can force him to go to another continent, that would be the best." Jinrenli said, "I'm afraid it won't be easy. Once he leaves Donghua, where will he find the spirit cave?" Jinrenyu said, "Our continent has spirit caves and 16 sections. He doesn't have a place to move around. Even if he swallows the souls of some junior disciples, he won't be able to advance much. In the end, he won't be able to stay." Jinrenli said, "Fine. Seeing that his mind isn't in a mess, as long as he doesn't cause trouble for the Netherworld Spring sect, there's no need to pay attention to him." Sima Qian fled for thousands of miles. Seeing that no one was chasing him, he stopped and thought about where he should go. Since the path back to the sect was blocked. In that case, he could only go to other realms to search for the Devil's Lair. As an elder of the Netherworld Spring sect, he knew the locations of many minor Devil's Caves. Most of them were under the control of the 6 sects, but there were also many that were beside the Xianmen. However, he was a little hesitant about which family to start with. After some thought, just now, although Taoist Master Li was fighting with him, he seemed to have the intention of letting him go. Since that was the case, he would not provoke the spirit sect for the time being. He only went to look for bad luck in the Celestial Sect of Wonders. Shaoqing sect, Yuxiao sect, and Qinsang sect were powerful, but he did not dare to go to the places where these sects were. The Yuanyang sect's strength was not weak, and their sect was located in the middle of the East Flower sect. If there were any accidents, it would be hard for them to escape. The South Flower sect and the Taihao sect had always been on good terms. They advanced and retreated together, so it was not easy for them to get involved. The whereabouts of Butian Pavilion's mountain gate were uncertain. He did not know where he was, but Huanjin Temple was good at eliminating demons. There was also the twin devil-subduing mirrors, the sect's most precious treasures. This was the sect he was most unwilling to run into. As for the Lishan sect, Yuling Jinren was on the verge of ascension and was not to be trifled with. The only place left was the Pingda sect. He thought about it carefully. There were 2 small demon caves around the Pingda sect, and this sect was located in the southwest. If the situation was not right, he could escape to the sea. It would be convenient for him to act. However, just now, when he fought with Daoist Master Li, he realized that he was not strong enough. Although he had become a sky demon, he did not know how to fight against the Grotto Heaven. If he ran into them again, he would probably be at a disadvantage. Thus, he was thinking about whether or not he could use a Dharma treasure to make up for his shortcomings. However, his sky demon body required different Dharma treasures from ordinary people. Apart from some earthly materials, he also needed a cultivator's soul and blood. How about this? I will first go to the East Sea and cause a ruckus. At the same time, I will gather all the materials and let everyone in the world think that I have escaped from the East Flower sect and gone to the sea. Then, when the storm calms down, I will sneak back and no one will know. After making up his mind, he immediately rode the Yin wind and headed east towards the sea. At this moment, most of the Jinjin in the world were in their sects, so no one noticed his whereabouts. This allowed him to leave the East Flower continent smoothly. Once he reached the sea, because there was no threat from the Jinjin, he suddenly felt that the sea and the sky were wide. At this time, he noticed that there were more than 10 places full of spiritual energy. He knew that they were all places where cultivators lived, but he had no scruples here. He immediately picked one of them and flew over. He went straight through the formation of the mountain gate and arrived at the mountain gate. He was also very careful to not attract unnecessary trouble. He first glanced at the sect, and when he saw that he had never heard of this sect, he no longer had any misgivings. He circled around in the air, and in just a moment, he devoured the souls of the hundreds of cultivators in the area. Then, he left this place and headed toward the next sect. In less than an hour, he had slaughtered more than 10 sects, including many places where rogue cultivators of the devil sect gathered. Ever since he took over the body of the sky demon, this was the first time he swallowed the souls of cultivators. For a moment, he felt that it was extremely sweet, as if he was drinking nectar. Although his cultivation did not improve, it did not regress. Especially that strand of demonic nature, it did not come out to cause trouble. This time, he also collected a lot of blood, but it was not enough to make an instrument. He sensed that there was another sect a few hundred miles away. Its spiritual opportunity was stronger than any of the previous sections. Naturally, he would not let it go, so he immediately rode the Yin wind and flew over. A short while later, he arrived in front of the sect. He didn't care about the formation and went straight in. When he raised his head, he saw the words, Pengyuan sect, written on the board. He paused and muttered, I think I've heard of this sect before. At this moment, he saw a disciple on duty walking over. He immediately leaped into the disciple's body and used a soul-searching technique. After looking at it, he was shocked. So, the disciple of the Qinsang School's Hall Master Du Zhen is cultivating here. He hesitated and thought to himself, this person's mana and supernatural power are so strong that even Yan Changsheng lost to him. I can't provoke him now. Thinking about this, he decisively abandoned this place and left. After sensing for a while, he flew to another sect. In the Duguang mountain of Taihao School, Huang Yugong and Jinren Shi first saw the river of Styx in western heaven. They knew that someone from the Netherworld Spring sect was subduing the demon. They thought that they could get rid of the demon, but they did not expect that the thunder would be loud and there would be no rain. After fighting for a while, they stopped. Huang Yugong sighed, we can only be a thief for 1,000 days, how can we guard against a thief for 1,000 days? If the sky demon is not caught, we will not be able to cultivate in peace. Jinrenshi said, the Yuxiao school is deliberately allowing it, and the Netherworld Spring sect is also tolerating it. If this goes on, the world will be in chaos. The sky demon could turn invisible and pass through formations as if there was no one there. Even though they were Jinren of Dongtian, they were still afraid that if they were not careful, their spirits would be invaded. Huang Yugong pondered and said, why don't we ask the Taoist friends from Huanjin Temple to solve this matter? Jinren did not think that it was easy. He shook his head and said, the sky demon is not easy to deal with. Even if the Taoist friends from Huanjin Temple could subdue it, it would be a great loss to their cultivation. Now that the disaster is not over, they will not come out easily. Huang Yugong thought about it and felt that what he said was not unreasonable. Even though the cultivators from Huanjin Temple had the intention to eliminate the demon, their own orthodoxy was obviously more important. If they wanted to ask them to come out, they would have to pay a big price. At this moment, a divine light came. Jinren reached out and took it. He opened it and said, the Yuxiao school kept their promise. They have already sent the elixir jade. In addition to those sent by the Netherworld Spring sect, we can hold on for a while. Huang Yugong sighed, if I knew that I would be so restless, I would rather it was the Netherworld Spring sect that took up the task of eliminating the demon. Jinren said, the matter is over, there is no need to talk about it anymore. You and I should discuss how to deal with the demon. Huang Yugong pondered for a moment and said, we have a spiritual bird in our sect called the star constellation. If it sees evil, it will definitely cry out. With this warning, we should be able to guard against it. However, it is not easy to raise this kind of spiritual bird. Other than the South Flowers sect, only the Blue Feather Pavilion has a few of them. If your sect needs them, I can write to ask for them. Jinren had never heard of the Bu Pavilion. He guessed that it should be one of the lower sects of the Nanhua sect. He bowed and said, thank you, Taoist friend. Outside the bright nether heavenly lake, a cloud raft flew over and stopped outside the restrictive formation. Two maids raised jade poles to lift up the curtain and Zhang Jin stepped out. Her beautiful eyes gazed out and saw that in the distant sky, the mountains were like great pillars that touched the ground and connected to the sky. The scenery could only be called magnificent. She looked up and saw a celestial river circling in the sky. Not only did it cover the great lake of Dragon Abyss, but it also surrounded the three lakes. She couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. After a while, she said, is Jinren Wang here? Zhang Zhen from Anata Temple is here to pay her respects. Not long after, the array door opened, and a dozen female cultivators in colorful clothes flew out. They all wore golden rings on their feet, and as soon as they arrived, they stood on the left and right sides, respectfully welcoming the guests. Then, a cloud flew out, and Wang Kaiwei stood on top of it, her clothes fluttering in the wind. When she was near, she bowed and said happily, Taoist friend, you are finally here. Please take a seat in the cave. Zhang Zhen bowed back and chatted for a while before following her to the Zhaoyu cave. On the way, she asked, when I came, I didn't see your patrolling disciples. Is it because of the sky demon? Wang Kaiwei nodded and said, it is because of this. The sky demon is invisible and has many strange supernatural powers. Therefore, the mountain gate ordered us to not go out if there is nothing important. Zhang Zhen pointed at the long river in the sky and asked curiously, this river is endless. It has a majestic sound but it is an invisible qi. If the sky demon comes, it will be difficult to pass. May I ask Jinren Wang, which Jinren did this? Wang Kaiwei raised her voice and said, this celestial river was created by my master. Zhang Zhen thought, so it was Hall Master Du Zhen who did it. No wonder. The two walked forward and suddenly, they saw a fierce black Jiao claw stepping on the clouds and flying over. A big-headed lad stood on the saddle. When Wang Kaiwei saw it, she said, that is my master's lad Jingyu. My master must have known that Jinren is coming and sent him to welcome you. Jingyu rode the Jiao closer and pulled the reins to pull the Jiao's head. He then bowed to Zhang Zhen and said, "Are you Zhenren Zhang from Huanjin Temple? My master specially ordered me to come and receive you. Zhenren, please get on the Jiao's back and follow me to the floating celestial palace." Chapter 1004. Zhang Zhen saw that this hall master Duzhen actually sent a boy to welcome her, and she was slightly surprised. Although this time she came with what this Zhenren needed, in her eyes, it was not a precious treasure, and she felt that it was not worthy of such a courteous treatment from a Dongtian Zhenren. Thinking about the reason, she felt that this was an expression of goodwill towards Huanjin Temple. When she came out, she also received orders from her master to try to be on good terms with Qinsang School, and this was also what she wanted. Thus, she said a few polite words to Wang Kaiwei, made an appointment to meet again, and happily got on the back of the Jiao. Jingyu secretly glanced at her. In just a moment, he had already thought of several things, but the smile on his face did not change. With a slightly flattering expression, he said, "This beast is not honest. Zhenren, you must stand properly." The inky Jiao was not convinced, and muttered a few words, but did not dare to make a loud sound. Zhang Zhen could not help but smile. Jingyu pulled the reins, and the inky Jiao turned its head and swung its tail, stirring up a thick cloud. It then lightly shrugged its body, and suddenly flew up into the sky. When it reached 1,000 feet high in the sky, it saw a wall of clouds. The Jiao roared, and with all its strength, it leaped up, and crashed into it. The heaven and earth widened, and suddenly a celestial palace floated at the top. It was vast, and there were spiritual waves around it, and strong winds howled. The sea of clouds was like a raging wave, undulating, and surging non-stop. It could be said to be a pure and righteous qi, gathering thousands of miles of Xian qi. Zhang Zhen had heard that this floating celestial palace was set up by the founder of Qinsang School, Tai Ming Zhenren, and its position was exactly where the spiritual eye was. Unconsciously, she looked at it for a long time. At this time, the inky Jiao suddenly rushed forward, and the howling of the strong winds by its ears disappeared. It turned its head again, and dragged its long body down the cloud head, and turned around a corner of the celestial palace. After a while, it went around a towering watchtower, and saw a big hall, and slowly descended. It climbed and landed on the empty space in front of the hall. Jingyu came down first, and respectfully bowed to her, and said, "Zhenren, please go in, master is waiting for you inside." Zhang Zhen did not look down on him just because he was a servant boy. She thanked him solemnly. He got off the flood dragon's saddle and walked up the jade steps. Soon, he arrived at the entrance of the hall. Before he even reached the inner room, a strange feeling suddenly welled up in his heart. She shook her head, calmed herself down, and moved inside. 100 steps later, Zhang Xian arrived at the center of the hall. She saw a handsome young Taoist sitting in the hall, but when she saw him, she unconsciously clenched her sleeves. She stared at his face and didn't speak for a long time. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Little ya, could it be that you don't recognize me?" When Zhang Zhen heard him call her by her childhood name, how could she not know that the person sitting in the hall was her own brother? After hundreds of years, ordinary people would have long turned to dust. However, as a cultivator, the past was still vivid in her mind. As if it was yesterday, all kinds of emotions surged up in her heart. Her eyes turned slightly red, and she softly said, "Is it really you?" Zhang Yan heard that although she softly called him, but it revealed her true feelings. There was surprise and joy in it. There was also grievance and bitterness, and even a bit of complaint and intimacy, as if she was blaming himself for not coming to find her for a long time. He sighed in his heart. He didn't really care about what happened to his predecessor. However, since he inherited this body, he naturally accepted the cause and effect. That year, when he used the pulse-seeking technique, he went to his second brother Zhang Zhan's place to take a look. However, this little sister was different. That year, he only sensed that she was also a cultivator, but he didn't know where she was. At that time, his family's Taoism had not been completed, and there were many enemies in Xianmen and Xianmen, so he didn't have time to look for her. When he really heard of Zhang Zhen's name, it was when Han Wenke went to Huanzhen Temple to ask for the exorcist tome. However, there were many people with the same surname in the world, so it was hard to know if it was the same person. It wasn't good to rashly recognize her, so it was delayed. He pointed to the seat in front of him, and called out, "Little sister, come and sit in front of me." After all, Zhang Zhen was a cultivator, so she quickly composed herself and said, "Brother, please accept this little sister's greeting." Zhang Yan stretched out his hand to stop her, and said gently, "The two of us are close relatives, let's dispense with some etiquette if we can." Zhang Zhen said seriously, "I will listen to brother." When she finished, she walked to Zhang Yan and sat in front of him. Zhang Yan looked at her a few times, and sighed, "You and I have been separated for hundreds of years, and now that we meet again, I didn't expect that we have both entered the path of Tao." Zhang Zhen said softly, "Little sister originally heard that there is a Jinren in the Yutsang sect who has the same name as elder brother. I had a guess in my heart, but I didn't expect it to be elder brother." Zhang Yan said, "When grandfather went to Yunzhou to take office, he was robbed by a masked robber on the way. You and second brother were separated. Later, grandfather gathered his men and sent people to search for you, but to no avail. He thought that the two of you had been killed, but I used the pulse-seeking technique and found out that you and second brother were still alive." Zhang Zhen's eyes brightened, and she said happily, "Second brother also escaped with his life? I wonder where he is now." Zhang Yan said, "I also went to visit second brother. Although he was the master of a place, he didn't have the fate of the two of us. After hundreds of years, he should have passed away." Zhang Ji felt a little sad. The three of them came from the same mother and were very close to each other. She still remembered that her two brothers treated her very well and often thought of ways to bring her family out to play. Because of this, they were often punished according to the family rules. She did not expect that they would suddenly be separated for hundreds of years. One of them was even separated from the heavens and the earth. She looked at him and asked, "Since you followed grandfather to take office, how did you enter the path of Tao?" It was not convenient for Zhang Yan to tell her about Madame Zhou, so he only said that after grandfather passed away, his family saw through the mortal world because of one thing, so they came to the mountain to seek Tao. Although he only said a few words, and it sounded very normal, but Zhang Zhen herself was a cultivator, and she knew how difficult the path of cultivation was. Her brother was able to stand out from many of his peers, and it was not easy for him to reach this step today. She didn't know how many hardships, tribulations, battles and killings he had to go through. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Let's not talk about me, but about you, little sister. How did you become a disciple of Master Pang?" Zhang Zhen did not hide anything and told him everything in detail. When they encountered strong people, because the other side's cavalry was large and sudden, the caravan was scattered. At that time, she was only a little girl of 5 or 6 years old, and did not know what happened. She was only taken by the maid to hide in the bushes. But her luck was not good. Because of the maid's beauty, she was targeted by the bandit leader, and was later taken to the mountain. The bandit leader thought that she was young and useless, and could only eat but not do anything, so he wanted to kill her. It was the maid called Xiao Zhuang who begged to save her life and promised to serve him with her body. Only then did the bandit leader move and reluctantly let her stay. In reality, the bandit leader had other plans. Zhang Zhen was born beautiful, so he wanted to raise her and give her to his subordinates after she grew up. At the very least, he could sell her for a good price. He also thought that Xiao Zhuang was willing to serve him, so he took advantage of the situation. Xiao Zhuang, on the other hand, was a very scheming woman. Because she used to follow her mistress to manage the manor's accounts, she not only knew how to calculate, but also knew how to read and write, and had seen the world. Very quickly, she gained the bandit leader's trust and managed everything inside and outside the stronghold in an orderly manner. She even invited a teacher to teach Zhang Zhen how to read and write, and she also invited a Taoist from somewhere to teach her the breathing technique. But when Zhang Zhen reached the age of 11 or 12, her appearance was already beautiful beyond compare. Xiao Zhuang realized that she could not stay in the stronghold anymore, otherwise, something bad would happen. So she secretly ordered people to take care of everything and entrusted her to the Taoist, who sent her down the mountain that very night. When Zhang Zhen said this, she felt a burst of sadness in her heart. She lightly sighed and said, "When I went down the mountain, I saw a fire on the top of the mountain, and the red light filled half the sky. At that time, it was the dry season of autumn, so once the fire started, no one would be able to escape. What Aunt Xiao did was to sacrifice her life to save me." Zhang Yan nodded slowly. It was not difficult to guess that this was Aunt Xiao's plan. He also knew this woman in his previous life. He remembered that she was a young girl with curved eyebrows and an amiable smile. She was only 13 or 14 years old at that time. Although she was a servant, what she did could be called an extraordinary woman. Zhang Zhen said, "That day after I escaped down the mountain, I wanted to go to Yunzhou to find my grandfather, but I didn't expect to meet a group of soldiers on the way. Although I escaped, I lost contact with the Taoist. At that time, I mistakenly entered deep into the mountain and almost fell into the belly of a beast. Coincidentally, there was a disciple from Huanjin Temple who was cultivating in the human world passing by. He saw that my aptitude was not bad and that I had learned the breathing technique before, so he brought me into the temple. After cultivating for 10 years, I was chosen by my master and accepted as a disciple. Later on, I learned the flying escape technique. I went to the old place and saw that it was already luxuriant and there was no trace of the past. I have no way to repay this great kindness." Zhang Yan saw that she was thinking about the past and was a little depressed, so he comforted her. "Little sister can enter the path of Tao in this life, it is also a rare fate in the world. As a cultivator, we can put aside all the sufferings of the past." Zhang Zhen nodded and said, "Brother is right." Zhang Yan asked, "Since little sister has entered the path of Tao, do you have any request?" Zhang Zhen shook her head gently and said, "Initially, I only wanted to repay my master's kindness and not let down the sect's expectations. However, since eldest brother has reincarnated and left, my master has placed all the hopes of the sect on me. I wholeheartedly cultivated and only hope to enter the state of Xiang Xiang. I dare not hope for anything else." Zhang Yan was surprised. "Oh, Jinren Liang has already reincarnated?" Zhang Zhen said, "Eldest brother has been gone for more than 20 years. It is only to prevent outsiders from having ill intentions, that's why he announced that he is in isolation." As she said this, she sighed again. Eldest brother originally had a high chance to take that step. However, senior brother's ambition is extremely high and he stopped here in order to seek the Supreme Dharma. When Zhang Yan heard the two words, Supreme Dharma, he knew that Jinren Pang must have told her about the Dharma of Grotto Heaven. If he was not mistaken, she should be the one who was trained by Huanjin Temple. At this moment, Zhang Zhen looked over and asked, "I wonder what is it that brother is seeking for in cultivating Tao?" Without the slightest hesitation, Zhang Yan said resolutely, "I have found the path to immortality." Zhang Zhen grunted and said, "Brother is already a Grotto Heaven. If you take another step, you might be able to break the boundary and leave." Zhang Yan smiled and pointed at a strange stone placed in the side hall and said, "Little sister, look. This stone was formed at the beginning of this world. After millions of years of wind and rain, it is still standing strong. As for me, as a Grotto Heaven cultivator, even though I have supernatural power, I can only live for more than 3,000 years. Not to mention competing with the sun and the moon, I can't even compete with this mountain stone. Therefore, I can't attain immortality and Tao. Everything in front of me is ultimately an illusion." Chapter 1005. When Zhang Zhen heard what Zhang Yan said, she agreed with him, but she also knew how difficult it was to achieve Tao. When she entered the sect, she was filled with expectations. If there were no accidents, she would be the next master of Baoyang Grotto. However, her master, Pang Yunxiang, had been in Tao for more than 2,000 years and now had less than 1,000 years of life left. In the past, when the master and disciples sat and talked, they would often sigh about their short lifespans and the fact that they had no hope of ascending to heaven. Every cultivator would more or less have the thought of ascending to the great Tao, but very few people in the world could actually walk this path. Most of them either stopped in fear when they saw that the road ahead was dangerous, or they had bad luck and died halfway. In fact, even some of the plants in the world had a lifespan of 10,000 years, not to mention the strange stone just now. However, even if they could extend their lifespan to that point, without great karma, great determination, and great willpower, they would not be able to escape the fate of dying of old age. She stood up and bowed, saying, "My master said something similar. Even though my cultivation is shallow, I know that this is not easy. I hope that you can achieve this goal." Zhang Yan nodded and raised his hand, gesturing for her to sit down, saying, "To achieve Tao, there are many twists and turns and countless difficulties. There is no smooth path. Not to mention the future, just looking at the present, there are 3 major tribulations. If you can get through it, you can open up a new world. If you can't, then everything will end." Zhang Zhen asked curiously, "Speaking of this tribulation, my master once said that when it happens, even the people of the grotto heaven will not be able to avoid it. But when I asked later, my master always shook his head. Not to mention the details, you are a grotto heaven Jinren, do you know what is going on?" Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "Jinren Pang did not say anything because he was afraid that if I knew now, I would provoke the devil in my heart and it would be difficult for me to get through it." In reality, although the Jinren of the various sects had their own speculations, the small sects were unable to change the situation. They could only wait for the tribulation to come, and it was extremely passive. Whether they could survive or not depended on their own luck. They could only sit and wait for the tribulation to arrive. It was extremely passive, and whether they could survive or not would depend on their own luck. What was different was that the big sects took the initiative to respond. Just like how sect master Qin worked together with Shaoqing to initiate the calamity and gain the initiative by striking first. Yuxiao and Nether Spring sects also had 10,000 years of legacies. It wasn't hard to guess that he had his own arrangements. From Zhang Yan's point of view, the Inata temple had been passed down for a long time and had the art of subduing demons. If he could pull it over when the calamity came, it would be a great help. As for Zhang Zhen, she was his sister and perfected being Pang's direct disciple. However, the chances of success were extremely high. After the two of them exchanged a few more words, Zhang Zhen said, "It's something that elder brother needs. Xiao Mei has already brought it here." With a tap of her slender finger, a wisp of white cloud floated up from her fingertip, and a big U fluttered out. She placed it on the main hall and said, "These are the earthine treasures that my monastery has collected over the past 1,000 years. However, these were all obtained by my fellow Taoists in the past. However, I can't give them to elder brother for nothing. I have to exchange them for some good stuff to be able to answer to my fellow Taoists." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I naturally won't make things difficult for you." Although he and Zhang Zhen were close, they both had sect masters behind them. Of course, he couldn't just be selfish. He waved his sleeves. A 3-feet-tall treasure ship that shone with golden light floated down. He pointed and said, "I believe that you need quite a lot of elixir jade for your cultivation. I will use this to exchange for your treasures." Zhang Zhen was shocked when she saw so many elixir jade. Perfected being Pang gave her quite a lot of elixir jade so that she could quickly improve her cultivation. However, in the past, he only gave her a piece the size of a finger. It was far from what Zhang Yan took out. She thought for a moment and shook her head, "I can't accept it. Elder brother will be at a disadvantage if there are so many elixir jade." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I am in charge of the Hall of Duzhen, so I do have this amount of wealth. As a family member, I should take care of you. Just accept it." The Hall of Duzhen didn't have a main hall master for hundreds of years, so it had accumulated a lot of elixir jade. Other than the big and small elixir jade used by the people in the heavenly abode, the rest were what the Yuanian cultivators called inferior jades. These items were useless to him. Ever since the sect master opened the celestial palace, the disciples could come to the Hall of Duzhen to cultivate once their cultivation level reached a certain level. Similarly, they wouldn't need much. Now that he was using them to exchange for treasures, he also had the intention to help Zhang Zhen on her journey. Zhang Zhen looked at the ship full of elixir jades, bit her lower lip, and said seriously, "That's not appropriate. Elder brother also has disciples, how can I take advantage of you? These precious materials are only worth 30 elixir jades at most, I will only take these." Zhang Yan had always been free and easy. Seeing that she didn't want to accept it, he didn't force her. He smiled and said, "Whatever you want to do, it's fine." Zhang Zhen made a sound of agreement. She raised her hand and took out a jade talisman from her sachet. She placed it on the table and said, "This talisman recorded more than 100 kinds of exorcism incantations, spiritual recipes, and talisman formation techniques. As for the sect's secret teachings, it's not convenient for me to tell you. I hope elder brother can understand." Zhang Yan nodded. With a thought, the talisman flew up and entered the space between his eyebrows. With his cultivation level, after looking at it, he immediately circulated it in his body. However, after trying it out, none of the incantations worked. His expression was normal and he didn't look disappointed. The cultivation method obtained by the Devil's Treasury had a mysterious origin. Compared to the cultivation method practiced by the Devil's Doctrine cultivators, it was very different. It could be said that they were two different paths. The reason why he asked for it was to learn from the side and see if he could find any similarities between them. Now it seemed that the spiritual recipes and talisman formation techniques might not work. Perhaps the secret method of Huanjin Temple could be useful, but this kind of method was not something that outsiders could see. Even if he was Zhang Zhen's biological brother and sister, it would be useless. For cultivators, in this kind of matter, the kinship between flesh and blood could not be greater than the kindness between a master and a disciple. Zhang Zhen saw that he was sitting still and asked with concern, "Elder brother, do you want this because one of the disciples is poisoned?" Zhang Yan shook his head and said, "It's not because of this." As they spoke, Jingyu said from outside, "Master, Jinren Jiang sent a letter here. It seems to be related to the sky demon." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. With a wave of his hand, a spiritual light flew into his hand. When he opened it, he saw that it was Jiang Zheng who had reported that the sky demon had arrived at the East Sea yesterday. In just one night, he had slaughtered more than 100 sects nearby, and a patrolling disciple from the Pingyuan sect had also been killed. Fortunately, the sky demon seemed to be afraid and did not attack anyone else. He put down the letter and said, "My disciple sent a letter saying that the sky demon escaped to the East Sea and is massacring cultivators overseas." Zhang Zhen asked, "I wonder if this martial nephew is doing well." Zhang Yan said, "He has my talisman to protect him, so he is not afraid of the demon." When the sky demon escaped from the demon's cave, he had already sent a talisman to each disciple. This talisman could stop the demon from invading their bodies. Even if there were any changes, he would be able to rush over in time. Zhang Zhen said, "This sky demon was obtained by Sima Quan using the phase reversal technique. I have dealt with this person a few times. Perhaps because of his cultivation method, this person has never been willing to fight head-on with others. He often uses unconventional methods and likes to use strange techniques. This time, he is causing trouble in the East Sea. I'm afraid it is not as simple as it seems." Zhang Yan said, "This demon was forced out of the spirit cave by the Yuxiao school and suffered a setback at the hands of Jinren Li of the Netherworld Spring sect. He should be lying low, but now he is so ostentatious, as if he is afraid that people do not know where he is. There must be a reason for this." Zhang Ji's eyes lit up and she said, "Brother, are you saying that this demon is trying to create a diversion?" She thought carefully for a moment and nodded. "It is possible. There is no demon's cave overseas, so that demon cannot stay for long. He can only rely on swallowing the souls of cultivators to nourish his demon body. If I am that Sima Quan, I can stay on the sea and secretly sneak back to find a spirit cave to hide in. If no one makes a move, I'm afraid he will be free for a period of time." Zhang Yan said, "The sky demon is everywhere, and it is hard to guard against it. If one is not careful, he will be invaded. Therefore, this situation will not last long." Zhang Zhen was slightly surprised. Zhang Yan's deduction was different from what her master said. After the sky demon was born, she asked Jinren Pang if he could fight against this demon. If he could, why did he just watch the demon come into the world and did not make a move? Jinren Pang said at that time that the Huanjin temple had a way to subdue the demon, so he was not afraid. As for the other sects, as long as they were alert, the sky demon could not do anything to them. However, because the disaster was coming, the action of eliminating the demon would damage their cultivation. Therefore, as long as the disciples were not harmed, they would not make a move. Sima Quan had not lost his nature. As long as he was not at the end of his rope, he would not make a move. This situation might last for a long time. It was even possible that it would last until the arrival of the disaster. She looked around and asked, "Brother, do you want to eliminate the demon?" Zhang Yan smiled and looked at the daylight hall. "I have fought with Jinren Yan previously. I am still recovering my qi, so it is not convenient for me to make a move. However, there will be someone who will come to subdue the demon when the time comes." Above the Donghai, Sima Quan headed east, hunting and killing cultivators. After a few days, he had unknowingly reached the far sea region. He looked ahead and thought, if I go any further, it will be the boundary of the Chongyue temple. There are also the Clear Feather sect and the Carp Demon tribe nearby. These three sects all have Jinren Pang's people. It is not convenient for me to go further. Just as he was about to return, his heart skipped a beat. He looked around and realized that the two female cultivators who came out from the Xiandang hut had stopped at the shore of the Donghai and walked back. It was obvious that they were afraid of the sky demon and did not dare to go out to the sea. How could he be willing to do that? These two were placed by his demon fetus. He could only be at ease if he sent them out of Donghua. He immediately shook his body and created two clones. One went to deal with the matter, and the other stayed here to create the illusion that he was still in the Donghai. After he was done, he turned around and returned to Donghua. However, after half a month, he arrived at the southwest. Here, he did not dare to get too close to the mountain gate of Pingde sect. From afar, he used his invisible body to burrow into the ground. Then, he created another clone and went to search for the two small demon caves. After another 2 days, he found one of them. However, when he went there, he found traces of Xianmen disciples coming in and out. Out of caution, he did not dare to act rashly. After waiting for a few more days, he found another small devil's cave. He went over to investigate, but there was no trace of anyone. Feeling very satisfied, he leaped down and disappeared into the cave. Chapter 1006. Zhang Zhen stayed in Qinsang school for 3 months before she left. Before leaving, Zhang Yan gave her a lot of jade pills. But this time, he gave it to her as the eldest brother, so she didn't refuse and accepted it. She came on a flying carriage and cloud raft, but when she went back, she rode on the 2 ink-black flood dragons that Zhang Yan gave her. The 2 flood dragons flew very fast, and there were no obstacles along the way. In just a few days, she returned to Anjin Temple. After returning to her cave residence, she took a bath and changed her clothes. Then, she went to Baoyang Dahua Grotto to see Jinren Pang. But when she entered the grotto, a white light flashed in front of her, and a child jumped out. He complained, "So boring, so boring. Why did you go to the floating heavenly palace? I didn't get to see anything, and I slept for nothing." The floating heavenly palace was protected by the great underworld grandmaster. Although the divine mirror of utmost enlightenment was a demon-subduing true artifact, the moment it entered the heavenly palace, its true spirit was suppressed and forced into a deep slumber. It only woke up when it returned to the Inata temple. Zhang Zhen apologized, "Please forgive me, Jinren Zhizheng. After I entered Qinsang school, I was taken away by Hall Master Duzhen for a meeting. I didn't know about this." The little boy stared at her with his eyes wide open. After a short while, he became discouraged and said, "Forget it, you can't be blamed for this. I was truly too unlucky." As soon as he finished speaking, he leaped up into the sky and transformed into a ray of light that flew off. Zhang Jin bowed to the ray of light and sent it off. She passed by the palace, stepped on the jade bridge, and entered the hall. Finally, she stopped in front of a water curtain and bowed. Disciple Zhang Jin greets master. Jinren Pang's voice came from inside. Jin, come in and talk. Zhang Jin responded, got up, and walked inside. The water curtain naturally parted, and when she entered, it closed again. When she saw Jinren Pang, she bowed again and said, greetings, master. Jinren Pang looked at her and asked, did you meet Jinren Zhang? Zhang Jin said, I've seen it. I don't dare to hide it from Shizuan. Only then did I know that Daoist Zhang is actually this disciple's blood brother. For Daoist cultivators, the relationship between a master and his disciple was the greatest, even more so than that of a father, son, or brother. Therefore, she could not tell anyone about this matter, but she could not tell her master. Daoist Pang had already guessed it, so she wasn't surprised. She pondered for a moment and said solemnly, it's good that master knows about this. After you leave, you must not tell anyone else. Zhang Yan was now the temple master of Qinsung School's Duzhen Hall. In terms of position, he was only below the headmaster. Zhang Jin would be the next master of Baoyang Cave. If the news of the two of them being siblings were to spread, outsiders would think that the Huanjin Temple and the Qinsung School were on the same side. Although Jinren Pang intended to do so, it was too early to reveal it. This was not good for the sect. Zhang Jin replied, don't worry, master. Your disciple knows the severity of the situation. She paused. She took out a jade box from her pouch and handed it over with both hands. This is what my brother asked me to give to master. Perfected Master Pang took it into his hand and opened it to see that it was 2 palm-sized pill jades. Just by looking at the color of the jade. Judging from the color, they were undoubtedly top grade. She was moved and said, Jinren Zhang is too polite. At the same time, she sighed in her heart. Although the Huanjin Temple occupied one of the top 10 spiritual points in Donghua continent, it still couldn't be compared to the Qinsung School. If she had such Dan jades, she would have kept them in her pouch and would not use them. However, the other party just gave it to her. She also knew that this time, the other party must have taken into account the fact that Zhang Jin was her own disciple. However, she was still a heavenly abode, after all. She also wanted face, so she wasn't willing to accept such a gift for nothing. She thought for a while and said, heavenly demons are outside, and all the sects are guarding their doors. I heard that Jinren Zhang's disciples are all talented. When you go back next time, you can bring dozens of demon resistance thunder beads that I have refined. Zhang Jin raised her head and said in surprise, Teacher, you, Jinren Pang said unhappily, do you think that I am a stingy person? I can still afford to give you a few thunder beads. Zhang Jin lowered her head and said softly, I dare not. Those thunder beads were not ordinary. They were refined by Jinren Pang from the 10,000 thunder pool passed down by the founding master. He used 800 years of hard work and only managed to get 127 of them. Even a heavenly demon like Sima Quan would not feel good if he got one of them. She knew that this item was originally prepared to be used during the tribulation. Although her master seemed to be indifferent on the surface, he was definitely reluctant to part with it. The two of them came down and talked for a while. When Zhang Jin saw that it was time for Jinren Pang to cultivate, she excused herself and went straight back to her cave abode. Just now when she entered the door, a maid came up and said, Jinren, Liang Nyangzi is here. Zhang Jin frowned slightly. She thought for a while and said, let her in. This Liang Nyangzi was called Liang Yueping. She was Liang Fengguang's adopted daughter. However, she was usually self-righteous and overbearing. She had offended many people from the same sect, but they did not argue with her for Liang Fengguang's sake. However, after Liang Fengguang reincarnated and left, no one obeyed her. She would always come to Zhang Jin to complain. In the past, she always avoided them, but today, she could not avoid them anymore. Not long after, a fragrant wind floated in. A woman with a face like peach blossoms and eyes like autumn water came in. She bowed and said affectionately, Yueping has not seen Uncle Master for a long time. I miss you very much. When I heard that Uncle Master has returned, I specially came to pay my respects. Zhang Zhen took a look and felt that she was very different from the past. After Liang Fengguang left, this woman was very restrained for a period of time. However, looking at her now, there was some usual arrogance in her brows. She said, I see that Shizhi's complexion is good and your skin is radiant. Is there a happy occasion? Liang Yueping seemed to have thought of something and her cheeks blushed. She said, Uncle Master can tell. AI, this is what Shizhi wanted to tell Uncle Master. As she said this, she showed a bashful expression again. Zhang Zhen looked at her quietly and did not reply. Liang Yueping waited for a long time, but there was no question from above. She could only bite her lips and speak first. A few days ago, Zhou family's Wulang sent a letter saying that he wants to welcome Shizhi to Yuxiao school to cultivate. In a few days, someone will come to fetch him. Shizhi thought that I would be leaving the school soon. Perhaps I will not be back in the future, so I specially came to inform Uncle Master. Zhang Zhen asked, Zhou family's Wulang, is he Zhou Yuxian from Yuxiao school? A hint of shyness appeared on Liang Yueping's pretty face. She nodded. Zhang Zhen thought for a while and shook her head. This is not appropriate. Liang Yueping raised her head in surprise and asked in confusion, why? Zhang Zhen said in a serious manner, this involves both Huanjin and Yuxiao schools. It is not your business alone. You cannot make a decision on your own. Wait for me to report to the headmaster, then we will make a decision. Liang Fengguang was the eldest disciple of the headmaster of Huanjin Temple. If his adopted daughter and the disciple of the Zhou family of Yuxiao as Daoist partners, there would be a lot of implications. However, there was no need to explain the reason in detail to Liang Yueping. Liang Yueping was stunned at first, then she said in a huff, what does it have to do with others who I become Daoist partners with? Moreover, I was raised by my adopted father. Other than him, I do not owe anyone. Zhang Zhen looked down and said, Shizhi is wrong. Since you are in the temple, you must be bound by the rules of the school. Moreover, you are the adopted daughter of my senior apprentice brother. It is impossible for you to have dual cultivation with a disciple from another school without the approval of your master. Liang Yueping suddenly stood up and said angrily, the headmaster does not like me. If I report this, it will be difficult. I thought that Shizhi was different from the ordinary people in the school, but I did not expect you to be the same. I will not talk to you anymore. After saying that, she walked out of the hall angrily. However, before she could rush out, the hall door slammed shut. She could not help but be shocked. She turned around and said with tears in her eyes, Shizhi, when my adopted father was still alive, he took care of you a lot. Now that he has passed away, is this how you treat me? Zhang Zhen's eyes were calm. She said, I see that Shizhi's cultivation has become a lot rusty recently. Since you have come to my abode, you should cultivate here. It is not too late to go out when you have improved. With a flick of her finger, a divine light flew out and bound Liang Yueping. With a scream, the formation flashed and she was sent to the other house. Zhang Zhen thought for a while and told the maidservant, in a few days, if anyone comes to Yuxiao school, tell them that Shizhi Yueping is following the master's order to cultivate Xuanfa and is not in the mood to care about other matters. If the person wants to wait, then let him be. Qinsang School, in the Xuanzi Sea. Zhang Yan closed his eyes and sat cross-legged in the sky. After a while, he opened his eyes and suddenly spat out a breath of white air. It was like a jade dragon crossing the sea. It suddenly turned into a strong wind and stirred up thousands of waves. Then, there were countless golden talisman jumping in the sea and sky. After a few breaths, they all disappeared. However, with a thought, they appeared again and surrounded the surroundings. He pondered and said, Huanjin Temple has some ingenious ideas to get rid of sorcery. It is considered superior. Although it is not suitable for me, but after this study, I have gained something else. It can be considered as a loss on the swings but gain on the mulberry. These days, he practiced the talisman techniques that Huanjin Temple sent over, but he still could not find a way to get rid of the demonic nature. However, even though he hadn't succeeded, he had gained a lot of insight into how to deal with time demons. From this, he had deduced a minor divine ability that could be used to expel time demons. Its power was not ordinary, and he planned to pass it down to his disciples in a few days. He reached into his sleeve and pulled out another jade talisman. This was something that Zhang Ji had left behind before he left. What was recorded on the talisman was not a cultivation method, but rather the various changes that would occur after the devil invaded a person's body. Ever since Huanjin Temple was established, they had been fighting with the demon. Among them, there were almost all the demons in the world. However, when he compared them, he realized that none of them were similar to the demonic nature in the body. Especially the demon that had cultivated the supernatural power, it usually invaded the cultivator's spirit. Once there was a flaw in the mind, it would attack violently. However, when he tried, he discovered that even if he intentionally revealed a flaw in his mind, he didn't see this strand of devilish nature come out to cause trouble. It still didn't increase or decrease, didn't flourish or decline, and actually didn't react at all. He changed his mind. There were still hundreds of years before the human tribulation. There was still a long time. Since there was no way to get rid of it, he might as well put it aside and think of a way in the future. The key thing now was to refine the Qiankun leaf. With the earthly yin material that Huanjin Temple sent over, he could harmonize the yin and yang with the dragon's spine. In a few years, he could refine the precious embryo. Levitating Astronomy. Chapter 1007. Ever since the heavenly demon created chaos, 7 years had passed in a flash. In the pill room of the Duzhen Hall, 24 flood dragons were circling around a pill furnace. Below them was a dense ball of fire that was rolling around the bottom of the furnace. Every 10 breaths of time, a flood dragon would spit out true fire to prolong the fire. Even further away, there were more than 30 half-naked mastiffs wearing only animal skin skirts. They were walking back and forth with long whips in their hands. Whenever they saw a slacking flood dragon, they would angrily rebuke it and whip it again. Under such whipping, even though these inky flood dragons were dissatisfied, they could only spit out true fire desperately. As for the forbidden spirit, she stood above and looked around with her beautiful eyes, staring at them closely. She knew that flood dragons were lazy by nature, and this batch of flood dragons had just arrived. The more honest ones would usually be obedient after a few whips, while the more cunning ones would think of ways to fake their errands as soon as they relaxed a little. Therefore, she had to discipline them severely. Sure enough, after a short while, he saw an old dragon panting heavily. It looked like it was trying very hard, but the true fire it spat out was much smaller. It was obviously just putting on an act and not putting in any effort. She pointed and shouted, "Tie it up for me." With her order, several strong by people immediately rushed out and dragged it down together. They used Cloud Sun Gold Lock to tie it to the pillar at the side, and then raised their whips to whip it. No matter how it begged for mercy, they didn't stop. They beat it until the dragon's scales were scattered, blood splattered, and it was on the verge of death. Just now, they stopped. However, these flood dragons were demons. They looked pitiful, but in fact, they only suffered a little physical pain. They didn't injure their foundation. The forbidden spirit waved her hand, and another person came up and stuffed a lot of medicinal pills into its mouth. Not long after, the old flood dragon's injuries gradually recovered. However, they didn't let it go. Instead, they gave it another good beating. After 3 rounds of torment, they finally put it down. At this moment, this flood dragon was already tamed. When it returned to the top, it began to spit out true fire with all its might. He didn't dare to slack off anymore. Only then did the forbidden spirit nod with satisfaction. Suddenly, her expression changed, and she looked toward the high platform inside the hall. She saw a grand clear light falling down, and after it spread out, Zhang Yan was already standing there. She hurriedly stepped forward and bowed, saying, "This servant greets master." At this moment, a tall and sturdy man walked over and knelt on the ground with a loud thud. He said, "Greetings to Grand Master." His figure was enormous, over 100 meters tall, and he was an entire level taller than his fellow clansmen. Moreover, his voice was incomparably resounding, and it shook the entire hall to the point it rumbled and reverberated. The forbidden spirit said, "This is Wu Kun, the leader of those puppets." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Get up, Chief Wu." Wu Kun was immediately overwhelmed by the favor. Although he looked crude on the outside, he was actually very quick-witted. He hurriedly said that he didn't dare, but he still lay there, not daring to get up. Zhang Yan smiled. Letting him be, he asked the forbidden spirit, "How's the refinement of the treasure fetus?" The forbidden spirit bowed and replied, "Since Master brought those treasured materials last time, the refinement has been much faster. This servant thinks that in another half a month's time, it will be done. It will be done when the time is right." Zhang Yan glanced at the furnace and couldn't help but nod. The treasured materials to refine this treasure were not easy to come by, and it was impossible to gather them again. He had to ensure that it would pass in one go. Since it wouldn't take long, it would be done. To prevent any unforeseen events, he decided to wait here for a while. Thus, he waved his sleeves and sat down on the high platform. The forbidden spirit saw that he had no intention of leaving, so she hurriedly called a few people over and served fragrant tea. Then, she retreated to the side and waited to be summoned at any time. Wu Kun saw that after Hall Master Du Zhen, Zhang Yan, arrived, he put in even more effort. He walked around below and urged his people. For a moment, the sound of whips could be heard in the hall, but it made the inky flood dragons miserable. 15 days passed quickly. Through the 3 yin-yang holes of the furnace, a burning light could be seen from time to time. As long as a cultivator knew a little about refining, they would know that this was the sign that the treasure was about to be ripened. Originally, there should be a loud sound. However, this furnace was not normal. It sealed all the spiritual vigor inside and couldn't leak out, so only the spiritual light could be seen. Usually, at such a time, it would require a person with profound cultivation to open a chi orifice on the treasure body and let heaven and earth exchange spiritual vigor. Only then could it exist in the world. This was like the birth of a baby and the sound of its umbilical cord breaking. However, this situation was different from the birth of a normal treasure. The earth-splitting heaven and earth leaf was refined for the second time. Originally, there was a true consciousness left. After the reconstruction of the fetus body, it was the same as being reborn. The true consciousness would fall into a muddle-headed state and not recognize its owner. It would naturally resist the invasion of spiritual vigor. If one used too much force here and hurt the true consciousness, they might not be able to refine it into a treasure in the future. However, if one were to relax, they might not be able to open the chi orifice. The treasure would be equivalent to a dead object. Even if they could try to refine it in the future, they would only be able to retain a few % of its original power. It would be equivalent to working hard for nothing. When a treasure refining cultivator reached this step, if they had no confidence, they would rather forcefully open the orifice. Even if they hurt the treasure, it was better than working hard for nothing. The forbidden spirit knew the key to this. He didn't dare to make a decision on his own. He turned around and asked, "Master, the temperature in the room is sufficient. Do you want to open the furnace?" As a grotto heaven cultivator, Zhang Yan's mana was profound. He didn't need to be as careful as normal people. He said calmly, "You can open the furnace now." The forbidden spirit didn't hesitate. He first ordered the masked men to disperse the flood dragons. Then, he used his mana to move and dispel the restriction above. Without the suppression of the restrictions, a deafening explosion could be heard. The entire pill hall shook violently, and the lid of the cauldron shattered into pieces. After that, a ray of spiritual light rushed out from the cauldron, and only stopped after reaching 10,000 feet into the sky. Zhang Yan was paying attention to the changes in the furnace. He saw an object flying away from the spiritual light, as if it wanted to escape. He flicked his finger, and a ray of green light flew out like a thread. It hit the object right in the middle. The object instantly trembled and stopped moving. After a while, a deep breathing sound could be heard, as if a giant in the sky was inhaling and exhaling. When the leader of the frivolous people, Wu Kun, saw that the chi orifice of the treasure had been opened. At this moment, it was already a success. He just needed to go back and nourish it a little. He immediately bowed and said, "Congratulations on obtaining the treasure, master." However, Zhang Yan stared at the sky and said, "I'm afraid it's not complete yet." Wu Kun couldn't help but be startled. When he looked up again, he saw countless dense mist surging around the treasure. When looking from below, it seemed to faintly gather into the shape of a dragon. Just as he was engrossed in it, his vision suddenly darkened. He was shocked to find that the sky was covered by dark clouds, and there were sounds of thunder coming from within. The forbidden spirit's expression changed, and he said anxiously, "Master, this is the treasured heart tribulation. I think it's because of that dragon's spine. Master, please take out your seal to suppress it." The so-called treasured heart tribulation was because the treasure material used to refine the treasure was too powerful. As a result, when the treasure was born, it would cause the spiritual vigor of the area to be in turmoil. Yin and yang would not be in harmony, and water and fire would be out of balance. Instead, it would be struck by lightning. If the cultivation of the treasure refiner was high enough, most of them would try to disperse it. Otherwise, they could only watch the treasure deal with it. If they could pass through this tribulation, their embryonic heart would be even more powerful, and they would have a good fortune in the future. However, if they couldn't pass through it, they would be reduced to dust. However, Zhang Yan's expression didn't change. In order to rebuild the heaven and earth leaf's embryo, he used a real dragon spine. He wasn't surprised by such an unforeseen event. He waved his hand and said, "There's no need to do this, let it be." This Xuanzi ocean realm was a world of its own. Although it attracted spiritual vigor, its power was far from the outside world. If the heaven and earth leaf couldn't even pass through such a small tribulation, then what was the use of it for him? At this moment, there were bolts of lightning flashing across the sky. It was dazzling, and the sound of the thunder was even louder than the world outside. If the heaven and earth leaf couldn't even pass through such a small tribulation, then what was the use of it for him? Facing such a great power, all the inky flood dragons hid under the platform and curled up into a ball. Even so, they were still shivering, afraid that they would be caught in the crossfire. Although the inky flood dragons weren't afraid, they were shocked by the power and didn't dare to move around recklessly. The lightning lasted for half a month before it gradually stopped. After another 1 or 2 days, the clouds and rain finally dispersed. There was only a shell leaf floating in the sky. There was a circle of gentle light around it. As it swayed gently, there was a fragrance in the air. All the inky flood dragons below had crawled out, as if they encountered some tonic, and were greedily swallowing it. Zhang Yan looked at it for a moment and called out softly in his heart. That treasured leaf felt its master calling and immediately responded. With a gentle wave, it floated down and stopped an inch away from his palm, slowly spinning and dancing in the air. Zhang Yan focused his eyes and looked. Just now, when the heaven and earth leaf came out of the furnace, he saw clearly that the embryo was not much different from before. However, after being purified by the lightning, it looked completely new. The surface of the leaf was translucent and bright like crystal jade. It was thin and soft, extremely transparent. When it was held on the palm, even the lines on the palm could be seen clearly. Every leaf stem was fine and delicate, and between the veins and lines, it was very mysterious. It was as if it was made by the heavens. Wisps of spiritual light spilled out from it, illuminating the surrounding 3 feet. This leaf vein was actually formed from the dragon's spine. With it as the carrier, this item was truly worthy of the name of heaven and earth. As its master, Zhang Yan could feel the true consciousness cheering and jumping in joy, as if it couldn't wait to go out and show off its might. He smiled and calmed it down with a thought. It obediently waited and didn't move. He watched for a moment and suddenly focused his eyes. He saw the blurry figure of an infant inside. It was currently hugging itself as if it was sleeping soundly in its mother's womb. He knew that after this tempering, its spiritual consciousness had improved again. However, to truly become a true spirit, he still needed to work hard to nourish and refine it. However, a few hundred years later would be the great calamity. He had to think of a way to succeed before that, or else it would be useless even if he obtained it. He looked again and the precious leaf sensed it. It turned into spots of spiritual light and entered his palm. After Zhang Yan kept the talisman, he looked down and said, "Today, the talisman has been refined successfully because of everyone's efforts. Everyone will be rewarded." All the inky flood dragon Raja below were overjoyed and kowtowed endlessly. Zhang Yan gave a few instructions to the restricted spirit, and after instructing it to take care of this matter, he turned into light and flew into the sky, returning to the main hall. Chapter 1008. After Zhang Yan returned to the cave residence, he placed the Qianquan leaf on the compass to absorb the spiritual vigor here. He nourished it every day, hoping to transform it into a true spirit one day. On this day, as he was repeatedly using spiritual energy to wash this magic treasure, a talisman flew in from outside the hall. Jing Yu took it, looked at it, and whispered, "It's Fangchen Courtyard's manager Yu Chongyang. He came out of seclusion and said he's here to see master." Zhang Yan recalled that when he went to the Fangchen courtyard to refine the remnant of the outer sky pillar, Yu Chongyang was still in seclusion, so he didn't get to see him. Yu Chongyang once said that after he came out of seclusion, he could come to the Duzhen Palace to cultivate. He said, "Tell Jinren Yu to wait in the outer hall." Jing Yu accepted the order and left. 2 hours later, Zhang Yan retracted his magic power. With a thought, he went from the formation door to the outer hall. Yu Chongyang waited for a long time, but he couldn't wait. Seeing him, he quickly bowed and said, "Greetings, Hall Master Du Zhen." Zhang Yan raised his hand and said, "Jinren Yu, you may dispense with the formalities." Yu Chongyang straightened up and sighed, "This time I came out of seclusion. I found out that Jinren came to Fangchen Courtyard last time, but I missed it. Hearing that Hall Master allowed me to cultivate in Duzhen Hall, I felt that there was room for improvement, so I took the liberty to come here." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I'll have to trouble Jinren Yu. I can only cultivate with the elders outside the hall." Duzhen Hall was in the Xuanzi realm. Elders who weren't from the top 10 disciples couldn't enter without a summon. Even when Zhang Zhen came last time, Zhang Yan only met her outside the hall. Yu Chongyang also knew the rules here and said he didn't dare. Zhang Yan said, "Since Jinren Yu came from Fangchen Courtyard, do you know how the outer sky pillar is?" A few years ago, he went to Fangchen Courtyard's earthly fire heavenly furnace to take a look, but at that time, Hall Master Su Yingtong suggested to build a few more temples and add a few more layers of restrictions. In this way, even the junior disciples would be able to go beyond the heavens. Zhang Yan thought about the human tribulation. There was no safe place in the 9 continents. If the broken pillar was refined like this, it would be able to send his disciples to the 9 continents in times of danger. Actually, he could also go to the upper extreme hall. In the void, he was also restricted by the great underworld ancestral master. It was the best place to hide from the calamity. However, it was the sect leader's place after all. It wasn't a place for junior disciples to go. According to Su Yingtong's intentions, it would only take a few years before he agreed. However, in the past few years, he had been busy cultivating and nurturing his magic treasures, so he hadn't gone over to take a look. Because Yu Chongyang did not have an official position, he did not have much scruples when speaking and laughed lightly. He said, "Although Headmaster Su is a bit worldly, his attainments and formations are indeed not bad. When I came out, he was still adding restrictions to the broken pillar. Even though it looks very magnificent now, it's not like I couldn't tell when he stopped. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that he was using it to travel through the void." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "That's good too. I'm not in a hurry to use it. I want to see how Elder Su can build that broken pillar in the end." The two talked for a while. Yu Chongyang knew that Zhang Yan coming out to see him was already giving him a lot of face. He had to be tactful, so he said to take his leave. Zhang Yan did not urge him to stay. He ordered Jingyu to send him down to settle down while he returned to the palace to cultivate. Outside the 10 Peaks mountain, a flying carriage stopped and Xiao Suo got off. After being notified, Chen Feng personally came out and invited him into the study. After the host and guest were seated, he said, "Senior brother Xiao came at the right time. Recently, I have something to ask senior brother." Xiao Suo said with a smile, "Every time I come here, junior brother must have something to ask, but you never come to visit me. You are not sincere." Chen Feng said apologetically, "It's junior brother's negligence. I apologize to senior brother." He stood up and was about to bow. Xiao Chua also stood up and stopped him. He said seriously, "It's just a joke. Junior brother doesn't need to be so serious. It won't be good if outsiders see it. Besides, with your contributions this time, it won't be hard for you to take the position of side hall master after you pass away. At that time, I will have to rely on you to look after me." Chen Feng shook his head and said, "Junior brother is worried about this." Xiao Chua said, "Oh, why is that?" Chen Feng sighed and said, "In this battle, although junior brother blocked the Blood Soul sect in the north, the result has not been decided. If we really compare my contributions, it doesn't seem that big. Although the battle for the Devil's Cave had ended, the two sects had not really decided a winner. Because of this, he was a bit embarrassed. With this contribution, he should be able to take the position of side hall master of Daylight Hall. But the Devil's Cave had not been settled. If he said it, it would be easy to be criticized. When he first entered the path, he did things according to his preferences. But after he took the position, he was careful with his words and actions. He knew that if he didn't have the right name, he wouldn't be able to speak. If Qin Taiping was still here, he wouldn't have to worry about this. But the Qin clan had no one to lead it. This made him very uneasy. Originally, when the matter of the Devil's Cave was over, he should have given up his position and gone to Daylight Hall to cultivate. But because he was afraid that he would lose his position as side hall master, he didn't move. He wanted to use his position as first seat to do something. Xiao Chua stroked his beard and said, "Junior brother's worry is not without reason." "Oh." He thought for a moment and said, "With the current situation, I have 3 plans. But I am the one who speaks, and you are the one who listens." Chen Feng cupped his hands and said, "Senior brother, please enlighten me." Xiao Chua said, "The first is to find a way to stir up a conflict between the 2 clans. This is not difficult. In the North Continent, the Blood Soul sect is still surrounded by our altar. As long as we don't take it back, they will jump out sooner or later. At that time, we can kill a few elders and suppress them. Isn't that junior brother's contribution?" Chen Feng thought for a moment and felt that it was not appropriate. After the previous clashes, both the Mystic and Demon clans had lost many disciples. They needed to recruit new blood and train the younger generation. This was especially true for the small sections. Even if he wanted to, he might not be able to use righteousness to move them like he did in the past. Instead, it would easily cause complaints and ruin the reputation that his clan had worked so hard to build. "What about the second plan?" Xiao Chua said, "The second plan is much easier. Because our 2 clans have stopped fighting, the Donghua continent has regained some liveliness. However, there are still many demons in the mortal world. Many mountain spirits and wood monsters are still entrenched in the mountains. Junior brother, you can send some junior disciples to such places. They can gain experience and eliminate demons at the same time. This will help your reputation." Chen Feng nodded his head. The second plan is feasible. However, although this can be considered as a benevolent act, allowing some of the junior disciples to benefit from it, in the long run, it will be beneficial to the sect's reputation. At present, however, it cannot be considered as a meritorious deed. The elders above will not even give it a second glance. So he asked, "What is the third plan?" Xiao Suo chuckled and said meaningfully, "As for the third plan, "Junior brother, you can visit senior brother Hua in the next few days." Chen Feng was a little puzzled and said, "Senior brother Hua has been in isolation for a long time and has long ignored the outside world." At this point, his expression suddenly turned serious and he said, "Could it be?" Xiao Suo smiled and said in a low voice, "In the side hall, there have been continuous spiritual lights coming out from the top, passing through the sky, day and night. Recently, the spiritual vigor in the hall has become stronger and stronger, and it is gathering in one place. The fire in the mountain in the boundary is surging, and it is turbulent." "Junior brother, did you think of something?" Chen Feng took a deep breath and nodded. He stood up and bowed solemnly. He said, "Thank you for your advice, senior brother. Otherwise, I would have missed it." There was no Master Dong Tian in the Qin clan. Although there were elders cultivating in the hall, they were only in the outer hall. Naturally, they did not know what was going on inside. If Xiao Suo did not tell him, he would still be in the dark. Xiao Suo smiled and said, "Junior brother and senior brother Hui used to be good friends. Even if I did not tell you, you would know sooner or later." Chen Feng shook his head and said in an extremely serious tone, "I will definitely remember senior brother's favor." At the same time, in the southwest of Donghua, in the depths of a small spirit cave, Sima Quan sat on a cold and hard ice rock. In his hand, there was a ball of filthy thing that he could not identify. It was constantly twisting as if something was struggling to get out. He touched it with his hand, and after a moment, it finally calmed down. His expression was a little regretful as he muttered, "It's still a little lacking." In the past, he had captured many cultivators' souls from the sea. Other than the ones that he absorbed, the rest were used to forge this talisman. After a few years of effort, he had reached the last step. But now, he encountered a problem. The reason was that although there were many souls, most of them came from core formation and mystic light realm cultivators. Therefore, it was not strong enough. If he wanted to succeed, he would need at least dozens of Yuanying cultivators' souls. However, Yuanying cultivators were not like those normal disciples. They were in the middle of a sect. Small sects would at most have one or two of them. As for big sects, even if the talisman was forged, he would not dare to provoke them. But if this talisman was not forged, the spiritual opportunity would not last for long and would dissipate in the end. It would be a pity. Should he go out and kill cultivators or give up? At this moment, he could not decide. After pondering for a long time, he suddenly slapped his forehead and came to a sudden realization. "I'm confused. I'm not looking for a place like a spirit cave to live in. If I'm only looking for souls, then I can really go to the other continents." The more he thought about it, the more he felt it was feasible. Although the 9 continents of no return were big, there were only 2 places that were the most suitable. One was the North Dark Continent. There were many beast cultivators there, and most of them cultivated the strength path. It was very convenient for him to make a move. The only concern was that it was too close to the Qinsang school. There were also beast cultivators that were appointed by the Qinsang school. If he killed too many, it would be easy for him to expose his tracks. As for the other place, it was the Dongshin continent. He heard that there were many cultivators there. There must be people from the heavenly grotto heaven there, or else it would have been occupied long ago. However, this continent was very big, and it did not have a sect like the Donghua continent. The key was that he did not know his background. As long as he was careful, it would not be so easy to control him. Also, there was a vast ocean between this continent and the Donghua continent. It would be fine even if he caused a big commotion. If he really could not handle it, he could just leave. After thinking about it repeatedly, he decided to go to the Dongshin continent. But because he had never been there, he had no way of knowing what the situation was like. He could only make a detailed plan when he got there. Chapter 1009. Although Sima Quan had decided to head east, he didn't want to be hasty. Although the extraterrestrial demon hid in the spirit cave and was almost impossible to kill, he still remembered that the Jade Heaven sect had forced him to flee in panic with just a talisman. Therefore, he was extremely careful later on and did not dare to rashly go out. Fortunately, in these few years, he had been using devil chi to infect the lower generation cultivators. About 100 cultivators had been unknowingly controlled by him. He didn't take their lives and only used them to investigate the situation on the surface. This prevented him from cultivating in the cave and cutting off all information. Because he did it secretly and his techniques were profound, up until now, no one had noticed anything unusual. At this moment, he used his mind and looked at the minds of these cultivators. He knew that the Donghua continent was peaceful and nothing was out of the ordinary. He could make a move. So, he raised his hand and pointed at his brow. Then, he cut himself in half. The two mangled bodies turned into two balls of thick black smoke, and with a roll, they transformed into two identical people. One of them sat motionless, while the other left the ground and floated towards the surface. This clone quickly left the spirit cave and went downstream along the Cheng River. Most of the people living along the river were mortals, and there were fewer cultivators. So, he left the Donghua continent smoothly and arrived at the East Sea. 7 years ago, he had massacred many sects here, and they had not recovered yet. The flying boat's celestial market that was originally in the sky was also nowhere to be seen. However, he occasionally saw a few cultivators on the sea. Since he had already identified his target, he naturally wouldn't lose sight of the bigger picture because of these people. He ignored them and focused on his journey. Soon, he arrived at the distant sea. Because the three families all had grotto heavens guarding them. In order to avoid any accidents, he turned into an invisible body. Even if it was slower, it was better than encountering trouble. After nearly 2 months of delay, he finally arrived at the ocean. There was no need to hide his tracks here, so he boldly flew across the sea. 3 months later, he came to the outer sea of Dongsheng. However, he encountered some trouble here. There were countless thick thunder clouds on the surface of the sea. They looked to stretch for tens of thousands of miles and hung extremely low. In the sea, there were thousands of strange fish swallowing thunder and fire. They jumped and jumped, causing the sky and water to be filled with lightning. He had no choice but to dive into the deep sea and try to avoid it. It wasn't until he reached the shore that he resurfaced. They arrived here. Many rogue cultivators could be seen. Although he was anxious to understand the situation here, these people's cultivations were not high and their knowledge was limited, so he was not in a hurry to make a move. However, when he looked up, he was shocked. There was black smoke rising in the northern sky, as if there was a dragon or snake coiled in it. It was obviously the spiritual vigor of the grotto heaven cultivator. He didn't want to provoke them, so he looked elsewhere. He turned around and headed in the opposite direction. Within the deep abyss gate, Fu Baoxing stood on the star platform, his robes fluttering in the wind. His expression was solemn. After a long time, he pointed a finger. A glowing magic talisman flew out, leaving a trail of white smoke on the surface of the water, and flew a few miles away. Everywhere it passed, there was a faint sound of thunder. At the same time, hundreds of talismans could be seen surrounding the aura. It was faintly discernible, and it looked very similar to the divine art that Zhang Yan performed in the Hall of Duzhen that day. He used it and unconsciously nodded, thinking to himself, this divine art created by teacher is not only powerful, but it doesn't need to be compatible with the technique. It can be used as long as the talisman is prepared beforehand. This is another protective technique for us disciples. After I master it, I can pass it on to Huaishan to cultivate, and he can teach the other disciples in the future. After practicing for a few more hours, he felt a strange sound coming from the formation. It was obvious that someone was here, so he stopped and said, "Is it Huaishan? Come up to the stage." Not long later, a middle-aged cultivator filled with righteousness came up to the star platform. It was his eldest disciple, Long Huaishan. He came up and bowed, "Greetings, teacher. It is my sin to disturb teacher's cultivation." Even though Fu Baoxing rarely asked about the sect's affairs, it wasn't that he didn't care. Looking at his expression, he could more or less guess the reason. He sighed and said, "Is there another messenger from Zhongtai sect?" Long Huaishan said, "Yes, he came again to ask for my help to take back the celestial city that was previously occupied. Because I have already rejected him twice, I can't reject him outright this time, so I came to ask for teacher's opinion." Ever since Zhang Yan forced the Python tribe to retreat and solved the crisis between the two sects, Luo Mengzi knew that he had no chance to invade the upper continent, so he didn't put in any effort to support the rest of Xianyu tribe, causing them to be completely wiped out by Zhongtai sect. It was supposed to be peaceful for a period of time, but who knew that the three sects of the south took advantage of Zhongtai sect's preoccupation and secretly took back a celestial city near Five Dragons River. Originally, Zhongtai sect couldn't take care of both sides, so they endured it. Now that they were free, they naturally wanted to take back the city. Therefore, they entered a dispute again. His sect couldn't do anything alone, so he naturally wanted to borrow the strength of Hanyuan sect. Fu Baoxing said, "As long as it's not demons like the Python tribe causing trouble, Hanyuan sect doesn't have to bother with these matters. Since that's the case, you can go and restrain your sect. Once you've set up the restrictive formation, just say that we have been sealed off by the sect for 60 years and are powerless to help." Long Huaishan was steady and conservative, so he usually didn't want to cause trouble. But with a neighbor like Zhongtai, there was always trouble, so he hated it deeply. This plan was to his liking, but he sensed something strange and asked, "Honored teacher, is there something wrong?" Fu Baoxing didn't hide it from him and said, "A few years ago, I received your grandmaster's talisman. He said that there were sky demons causing trouble in Donghua continent, so he gave it to me to protect myself. A few days ago, I received another technique, but it's a demon-subduing technique. Your two uncle masters also sent letters saying that the sky demons haven't been vanquished, so they told me to be careful. After thinking about it, I think it's better for Hanyuan sect to seal off the mountain and stay put." Although Long Huaishan felt that Donghua was far from here, even the grandmaster was so serious, so it was hard to guarantee that the sky demons wouldn't come. He bowed and accepted the order, saying, "I'll settle down now, but I'm afraid that my juniors won't be satisfied and want to ask for an order from you." Fu Baoxing smiled and said, "This time, I won't issue an order. Among all the disciples in the sect, your cultivation is the highest. If you can't convince your peers, how can I entrust the sect to you?" Long Huaishan heard this and was shocked. He asked, "Is honored teacher going to follow grandmaster's order and go to Donghua?" Fu Baoxing nodded and said, "Originally, I wanted to wait for another 100 years. When your junior brother Gu Feng has also cultivated Yuanying, then I can leave with peace of mind. However, I've been cultivating for a long time, and I feel that if I don't go now, I might miss out on a great opportunity. Therefore, I've decided to go to Donghua High Sect after I've mastered this demon-subduing technique given by honored teacher and taught it to you." At this point, his tone became heavier. "Huaishan, after I leave, you'll be responsible for the sect's heavy responsibilities in the future." Long Huaishan hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed heavily. He said, "I won't let you down, honored teacher." After Sima Quan landed, he wandered around Dongshan continent for a few days. He had already figured out the differences between the sects here and Donghua continent. Most of the cultivators here sat in celestial cities, which were their bases. They were heavily guarded, but the location of the sect was not valued. This made him feel strange. After wandering for another half a month, he found a secluded celestial city and snuck in. The restrictions here were useless to him. After entering, he easily took over the body of a Yuanying cultivator who was in charge of guarding here. Then, he used a soul-searching technique to roughly understand the power of the sects in Dongshan continent. However, after investigating, his heart trembled, and he thought to himself, that Hanyuan sect in the north is actually a lower sect of Qinsang school. I didn't expect them to extend their hands here. Fortunately, this person is not a disciple of their sect. Otherwise, it would be troublesome. With this sect around, it would not be so convenient for me to do things. The reason why he came to Dongshan continent was to avoid the Grotto Heaven spiritual masters in Donghua continent. Naturally, he did not want to expose his sect's tracks. However, from that cultivator's godly soul, he also learned that the three sects of the South and Hanyuan sect did not seem to be on good terms. Therefore, he decided to head south. When Hanyuan's sect received the news, he would probably have found enough godly souls. As soon as he thought of it, he immediately went south. After a month, he arrived at the boundary of Ku Xin sect. Here, he could see a spiritual opportunity soaring into the sky. It was spread out like a fan, like a painting screen. Sima Quan glanced at the other two places and also vaguely saw two spiritual chis. He thought to himself, although these people have all entered the gate of the elephant, their cultivation is far from spiritual Master Li's. Previously, when I couldn't see the clear chi above their heads from outside the continent, I thought it was intentionally concealing it. So that's not the case. It's because their chi is weak. At this moment, he could not help but think about whether he should find a way to attack these three people. If it was in Donghua continent, he naturally would not dare. Once he took this step, everyone in the world would be afraid that they would end up like him. They would definitely gang up on him and not allow him to exist in this world for another moment. However, it was different here. Luomeng's cultivation was obviously the highest, but he was a demon cultivator. Not only did he not have any relations with the human cultivators here, they were also on guard against each other. He only had to deal with three people from Dongshin Grotto Heaven. Even if he could not defeat them, he could still retreat safely. And if he could swallow the spirit of a person from a grotto heaven, the benefits would be indescribable. Compared to that, the Yuanying cultivators were nothing. With this thought, the demonic nature that had not appeared for a long time also stirred, as if it was urging him to act faster. It was as if it wanted him to immediately rush up and kill these three people. However, he did not act rashly. He looked at the chi for a long time and confirmed that the owner of the chi in front of him had the weakest cultivation. Only then did he turn invisible and sneak toward the place of cultivation. Not long after, he came to the bottom of a cliff with inscriptions carved on it. Below it was a 1,000-acre sinkhole. Thistles and thorns were everywhere, and the vegetation was lush. What was surprising was that the east of this place was slightly higher. There was a large flat rock, and on top of it was a stone brush that was a few miles long. The front part was on the rock, and the back part was stuck in the sinkhole, pointing diagonally toward the sky. It looked like a painting of heaven and earth. And that clear chi came from the cave abode on the cliff. Sima Quan looked at the stone brush a few times. He could see that this was a powerful real treasure, and it seemed to be a threat to him. He did not dare to be careless. With a gust of cold wind, he went around it and floated into the cave abode. Very quickly, he came to the depths and saw a woman sitting on a brocade couch. She was dressed in bright clothes and had her hair tied up in a high bun. She was performing a spell and was meditating with her eyes closed. Floating astronomy. P.S. There are no updates tonight. There will be updates around this time tomorrow. Chapter 10:10. Sima Quan was not in a hurry to make a move. Instead, he hid behind a stone wall and looked around the cave abode. The woman in front of him was Hang Yuyen, the enlightened Dong Tian of the Ku Xian clan. However, he saw that she had not even opened her own cave abode, which meant that her cultivation had not reached the second stage. It would be much easier to deal with her. Among the 16 sects of the Donghua continent, almost half of the enlightened Dong Tian lived in the cave abode. Even if they had not reached this stage, the elders of the sect would also have a cave abode to pass down. If he really wanted to make a move, just finding the entrance would be a headache. From the spirit of the Yuanying cultivator, he knew that the three sects of the southern land came from other continents, so it was reasonable that they were weaker. However, such people would usually set up powerful prohibitions to guard against external enemies. Among them, there would definitely be ways to defend against external demons. Although he was not afraid, he could not be careless. However, what made him feel strange was that there was only this woman around the cave abode. He was from the Netherworld Spring sect, so he knew that even the enlightened Dong Tian could not do everything by himself. There would always be a servant or disciple who would listen to orders. However, there was no one around, so there must be something unusual. Thinking about this, he became even more careful. As Sima Quan was sizing her up, Hang Yuyan seemed to have sensed something and suddenly woke up. She frowned and looked around. Just now, when she was activating the spiritual vigor, she felt a little strange, and she felt inexplicably uneasy. After pondering for a moment, she took out a spell and tried to find out what was wrong. The cultivators of the Ku Xian sect had been concocting pills all year round. Because of the explosive medicinal power of some precious ingredients, they often put people in danger. Therefore, they had a general sense technique that could allow them to use some of their magic power to roughly know if danger was about to befall them. However, at this moment, a circle of spiritual light suddenly appeared on the candlestick in front of her. Then, a light shadow appeared, and a voice came from inside, Yuyan. How is your cultivation going? Hang Yuyan stopped what she was doing, stood up and bowed. He said, thank you for your concern, senior brother shouting. With this Kuang Hua terrain brush, it's enough to ensure that the spiritual vigor from all directions will not disperse. Although it can't be compared to the spiritual cave, which is filled with spiritual vigor, it can still help my cultivation progress. In about another 300 to 400 years, I'll be able to break into the second stage. At that time, I'll invite De Ji Daoren to come here. It shouldn't be difficult to open up a heavenly abode. Gan shouting sighed softly and said, if I had given this treasure to your Ku Xian clan earlier, you might have already opened the grotto heaven. Hang Yuyan said, every 1,000 years, our 3 families will take turns to guard this treasure. It's also an agreement between our predecessors. You can't make the decision to guard the palace. But fortunately, there's still time, so there's no need to be too anxious. Gan shouting looked at her and said in an extremely solemn tone, according to what the founding master said in the past, a tribulation will descend in a few hundred years. When the time comes, no one will be able to escape from the 9 continents. Yuyan, this place is the most important. Whether or not you can overcome this tribulation depends entirely on whether or not you can reach that stage. Hang Yuyan said solemnly, I will do my best for the continuation of our 3 orthodoxies. Gan shouting said, that's still not enough. I heard that the Deep Abyss School is located in the Donghua continent, and there is a spiritual cave in the school. There should be a lot of Dan jade there. That Jinren Zhang seems to like to collect erosion inscriptions and rare treasures in the world. I will use some rare treasures and the erosion inscriptions left behind in the school to exchange for some. This way, Yuyan, you will be able to advance faster. Hang Yuyan asked, are you confident? Gan shouting said, this matter can be divided into 2 parts. The sect leader of the Deep Abyss sect is this Daoist Zhang's disciple. At most, we can give him a few immortal cities. Let him put in some good words in front of his master. Hang Yuyan expressed her agreement. Immortal cities were good. However, it was not enough to help them overcome their tribulations. Being able to exchange it for some useful items was the most important thing. She asked with concern, I wonder what happened to the Shaozang Jing. Gan shouting shook his head and said, I sent someone to discuss with the realm master, Wei Shuling. I tried my best to persuade her, but she was still unwilling to agree. If it was her senior apprentice brother, there might still be room for discussion. However, this person has a stubborn temper. I'm afraid this path will not work. Hang Yuyan laughed coldly and said, shouting, don't worry. At most, you and I can work together with Ji Daoren to find the small realm's gate, kill our way in, and take it for ourselves. Gan shouting, however, disagreed and said, the founder of the Shaozang Jingzang is an ascended Jinren. The means left behind in the small realm must be extraordinary. If we use force, we might lose our cultivation. Hang Yuyan was unwilling and said, are we just going to give up? If they encountered a great calamity, hiding in the grotto heaven was a solution, but they did not want to entrust their lives to one place. They had to leave a way out. Gan shouting said, recently, I've been thinking that if it really doesn't work, we can ask for a helper to come and set up the 4 heavens formation. At that time, we don't even need to do anything to force them to submit. Hang Yuyan was surprised and said, helper. Shouting, "Are you talking about Luomengza? Although this old demon's mana is strong, he is not on the same path as us. He has a demon tribe behind him. If he really enters the small realm, I'm afraid he won't be safe anymore." Gan shouting said, "I'm not talking about this old demon, I'm talking about Tao Zhenhong, the sect leader of the Clear Feather sect." Tao Zhenhong. Hang Yuyan looked like she was thinking. Gan shouting said, "This person is from the Xianmen Orthodox path. His Dao power is also strong. When we were killing Guiyuan Jun, I believe Yuyan has seen his skills. This person also does not have a spiritual cave to support him. Does he not want to find a place to hide when the calamity comes?" Hang Yuyan thought about it. Tao Zhenhong has been in the Grotto Heaven realm for about 500 to 600 years. She heard that he fought against the Carp tribe for a long time. He might have entered the second layer realm. However, he did not have enough spiritual opportunity. He wanted to open up a Grotto Heaven but did not have the ability. There was a chance to rope him in, so she said, "Is Ji Daoren also willing?" Gan shouting said, "If Yuyan thinks it's feasible, I'll go back and talk to him." Hang Yuyan nodded slowly and said, "Then let's do it for now." Gan shouting cupped his hands and bowed to her. The light and shadow suddenly dispersed, leaving only a candlestick with wisps of green smoke. Hang Yuyan originally wanted to use the supernatural power that could predict fortune and misfortune. However, with this interruption, she felt that she might be thinking too much. Moreover, the cost of using this skill was not small. Now that she could practice as much as she could, she gave up on the idea. She only examined the prohibition briefly and put aside all distracting thoughts to focus on her cultivation. Sima Quan was just now hiding at the side. He listened to all the conversation and was deep in thought. Before he became a sky demon, he was only a Yuanian cultivator in the Netherworld Spring sect. His master was long gone. Although he knew about the calamity, it was vague and he did not know the specific situation. Now that he heard that even the enlightened master of the Grotto Heaven was looking for a way out, he could not help but think about whether his sect could benefit from it. However, at the same time, he became vigilant. If he was a cultivator of the Grotto Heaven, he would definitely deal with his sect before the calamity to avoid any accidents. Therefore, the matter of refining the treasure couldn't be delayed any longer. It had to be done as soon as possible. Also, he could not let go of the enlightened master of the Grotto Heaven in front of him. As long as he swallowed his spirit, his cultivation would definitely increase greatly. However, it was impossible to occupy the spirit of the cultivator of the Grotto Heaven in one go. If Hang Yuyan had the chance to use the real treasure outside the door, or if the other two enlightened masters of the Grotto Heaven came to help during this period of time, he would have to give up. Therefore, he only had one chance and had to be very careful. Originally, as a cultivator of the Grotto Heaven, he was willing to wait for dozens of years. However, there was no turbid spirit vigor here. After a period of time, his cultivation would decrease a lot. He had to make a move within half a year to have the power to fight. He hid patiently and waited for an opportunity outside. Very quickly, several months passed. Finally, he found an opportunity. According to his observations these days, this was the time when the opponent's defense was at its weakest. Therefore, he immediately changed into an invisible form and drilled into the space between the eyebrows. At this moment, Hang Yuyan was using the real treasure to gather spirit vigor to nourish herself. Suddenly, she felt a chill enter her body. She was in a trance. It was as if she had turned into a little girl who had just entered the path of Tao. Faced with the scolding of an elder, she could not help but panic. However, her heart of Tao had been tempered for a long time. In an instant, she suppressed the strange phenomenon and returned to her original state. At this moment, how could she not know that she was being plotted against? Without thinking too much, she took out a spell and a treasure cauldron with a round lid and no ears appeared around her. Countless spiritual lights gushed out from it, wanting to expel the cold from her body. After Sima Quan entered her body, he immediately invaded her beer. He saw a person who looked like a baby girl sitting inside. He knew where the true sense was. As long as he destroyed it, victory would be in his grasp. Instantly, he shook his body and turned into countless demons, whizzing towards her. If someone from the devil's sect was attacked by this, they would immediately split their spirit so that they would not be invaded by him. Then, they would slowly deal with him. However, the opponent was a cultivator from the Xianmen sect, so he was not afraid. Hang Yuyan consecutively performed a few spells, but was unable to expel it. Instead, she felt a sense of exhaustion in her mind, and endless illusions appeared in her mind. Although she did not know whether the opponent was a sky demon, it was not difficult to guess that it was an invasion by an external demon. At this moment, she could not speak, and her body could not move. She knew that if this continued, once her mind was lost, she would die on the spot. Even reincarnation would not be difficult. Realizing this danger, she could only use the last method. A hint of nostalgia appeared on her face, and with a thought, she immediately severed her emotions and desires. The heart of Tao of Dongtian was not perfect, but it could be considered flawless. For those who achieved Tao through the middle and lower methods, if they let nature take its course, they would not have any thoughts or desires and would gradually enter a state of emotionlessness. In order to avoid such an outcome, they would often indulge in their emotions. Therefore, some of the Dongtian's people often looked like they were more perverted than ordinary cultivators. In fact, this was to prevent themselves from losing their true self. Among them, the Jinren who achieved Tao through the lower methods was even more so. She cut off all worldly thoughts and closed the door of emotions. The baby girl in the sea of knowledge suddenly disappeared, leaving only emptiness. At this moment, it was as if everything had come to an end, the sun and the moon had been extinguished, and there was not a single trace of life. At the same time, a beam of light suddenly flew out from the cauldron. It was a woman who looked exactly like Hang Yuyan. This was her corporeal body, and because her soul had been invaded, she was unable to gather her mana to call for help. She could only move this body with a single thought and send it to Fengxiang sect. As long as Gan Shouting saw it, he would definitely come to save her. If he could hold on until then, he would be able to escape with his life.